From the time I was 12 until I was 18, my mom lived in this 2-story apartment. I lived with and was raised by my maternal grandparents, but I also spent a great deal of time staying with my mother, so both places were equally home for me. For the entire 6 years that she lived there, my mother received sporadic phone calls from an unknown caller, who we both came to call the Hello Man. The reason for this is fairly simple. Whenever he called, he would say hello several times in a monotonous voice, with a short, evenly timed pause between each utterance. The only times he ever called was when no one happened to be there, so each call was always recorded on the messaging machine. Each time the call was made from a blocked number or a public place. It goes without saying as well that it was not a voice we recognized, else the person would have been eventually approached about this. The first few times we wrote it off as being a wrong number or perhaps some sort of strange prank. It wasn't exactly threatening in any way. It wasn't even really unsettling to us either. For the entire 6 years, though, we would constantly receive these calls. Sometimes weeks or even months would pass before we'd find another one of these messages on the answering machine. After a few years, once we'd become completely certain that it was not someone we knew, we still didn't find any harm in them. Irritating to come home on a bad day when you were already in a bad mood, but nothing more than that. Actually, it even became a bit of a running joke in the family, weaving into the idle comments that made up our days and small talk between one another. In all those years we'd received those calls, the messages were always the same, and no other form of contact was made between this person and us. About 2 years before she eventually moved out for unrelated reasons, my mother had her number changed, again for completely unrelated reasons. Several weeks after doing so, a new message from the Hello Man was left. The context of the call was the same. Hello? 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 But for the first time, the tone and pacing was different. There was barely a pause between each word, and he was louder, almost panicky in the way he spoke. Later that week, a second message was left. This one sounded angry, and he just said hello a single time. For the first time, we actually felt a little bit threatened by the caller now. How exactly had this person gotten her new number? You'd think this would be more of a reason for us to suspect a family friend or family member, but it only made us more sure that it was not. No one we knew would take a prank far enough to make us feel like a legitimate threat, no matter how small. The sense of fear disappeared quickly, however. It was weeks before we'd received another call, and when we did, it was back to the same old monotone and slow repetition as before. In fact, after this point, the calls came even more infrequently than before. We all but forgot about the Hello Man in the times in between. At the end of those 6 years, 3 years ago now, I was staying with my mom nearly full-time to help her pack up and organize. Due to some various personal issues, she would be putting most of her belongings in storage to stay with us, my grandparents, my siblings, and I, for a short time before finding a new place for herself. On one particular night, when it was just me and my mother spending the night at her now nearly barren apartment, we received one final call from the Hello Man. An actual call while we were there, not just a message left for us to find hours or even minutes later. At the time, we'd been taking a break and watching a movie, which was just the reason we'd still kept the couch, TV, and DVD player at the apartment. Hello? Hello? I know you're there this time. Hello? There was a long pause during which we heard nothing, not even the sound of his breath. Then, just as the answering machine was about to cut off his message, he started to quote a line from the movie we had just been watching and had just been said a few minutes before. The machine beeped and cut him off, but he did not call back after. Needless to say, we called my grandfather to come pick us up because we did not want to spend the night there any longer. This story happened when I was about 17 years old. My friend at the time was 16. I'm 24 and she's 23 now for perspective. We're both female, by the way. One night we were at my parents' house, which is basically small town USA. We decided to go for a walk around my neighborhood. It wasn't too late, but it was starting to get dark. It was maybe around 9 or 9:30 p.m. There were a few houses being built in my neighborhood at the time, so we decided it would be fun to explore inside of one. Side note, I've always been a bit paranoid and just naturally cautious, but my friend was the wild, rebellious one of our group. We entered the house through the garage area because there wasn't a door and the house was basically a frame with only a few walls. I stayed near the entrance because I was getting some really bad vibes. My friend decided to go further into the home. About 2 or 3 minutes into our exploration, I heard moaning sounds coming from the half-built stairs. I asked my friend if she'd heard it too. She said no and kept on looking at stuff. It was then that I saw a very large man stand up on the stairs and begin to walk down them. I screamed and grabbed her. "Run!" We bolted out of there. I refused to look back the entire time because I was too scared to check and see if he was running after us. Once we got to my house, we ran inside and locked the doors. Nothing else happened that night. The next weekend, the same friend was over at my house again, and we were sitting outside on my trampoline at about 1 a.m. We were just talking about random shit when she just stopped suddenly mid-sentence and went as pale as a ghost. I asked her what was wrong. All she could say was, "We need to go inside now." While we got off the trampoline, she never took her eyes off that spot of the yard she was staring at. Once inside, I asked her just what the hell that was all about. She said she'd seen someone in my backyard, sitting by my mom's flower bed, only 15 feet from the trampoline. The person was on the ground, rocking back and forth while staring at us. My mom and stepdad were already asleep, so we didn't want to bother them. Instead, we made sure all of the doors and windows were locked, and that there was a weapon by the door if it came to that. After we calmed down, we went down to the basement to my room and started watching some movies. The street lamp was shining through the little window in my room, and I shit you not, I could see there was someone walking back and forth in front of my window. At this point, we were so scared, we decided to wake my stepdad up. He went outside, but he didn't find anyone. Nothing happened again for a few weeks, until one day I was home by myself and kept getting these weird phone calls on the landline. It was this guy with a really deep voice, asking how I was doing, and what I was doing, and if my mom and stepdad were home. I hung up on him every time without answering. About 20 minutes after the last call was made, I heard a loud crashing sound in my basement that scared the fuck out of me. That was about all I could take. I pushed our couch against the basement door, grabbed a butcher knife, and noped the fuck out of there to my neighbor's house. Luckily, her dad was home and called the police. When the police got there, I told them everything that had been happening, and they checked out my basement. Someone had popped out the window in my bedroom and shattered it all over my bed. There was no one in the basement, though, and nothing like that has ever happened since. So I currently attend college in a major city in the United States. It's a lovely place with lots of fun things to do. However, it does have one big downside. It's a major human trafficking hub, one of the biggest in the nation, in fact. For me, a teenage girl, this means I have to be especially careful. My parents gave me the whole safety talk before I moved out. Never go out into the city alone, especially at night. For my first 8 months on campus, nothing too concerning happened, save for a few catcallers and the particularly inappropriate behavior of one homeless man as I ran by him during a workout. However, when I returned to campus after spring break, I had one of the most anxiety-inducing experiences of my life. I had visited my parents over spring break and taken a bus back. It was a lot cheaper than airfare, and my cat didn't handle flying so well. I'd visited home a few times, and usually I had no problems getting from the bus station to my dorm when I got back to the city. I'd just call up a ride from an app and be home in about 10 minutes or so. My bus got in around 9-ish at night, so it was already very dark outside. I'm not sure exactly what happened, but for some reason, the GPS on the ride-sharing app must have messed up my location. 4 different drivers missed the turn to find me and ended up canceling the ride. After 30 minutes of waiting, now on the 5th driver, I finally called to tell her exactly where I was outside the station, so there wouldn't be any confusion. She said she was on her way, so I stood there at the curb and waited. I had headphones on but was not playing any music. This was my way of preventing people from approaching me, but also allowing me to hear and be aware of my surroundings. Boy, am I glad I did that. After about 2 minutes of standing there on the curb, a man walked directly behind me, stopped and leaned up against a wall. At first, I was only mildly wary of the man. I could feel the vague sensation that he was watching me, but I was trying not to be too paranoid. After feeling the staring continuing though, I texted my boyfriend to let him know what was going on, just in case. The man pulled out a flip phone and made a call. I felt a bit less nervous, until I heard the details of the conversation. I'm not sure who he was talking to on this call, but the man was describing the details of my appearance into the phone. I could make out small snippets like, yeah, she's tall, maybe 5'8", 5'10". Red hair, yeah, she's young, really pretty. I tried not to show any signs that I was hearing all this. My headphones were still on, so I figured he thought I was clueless. I checked my phone to see where my ride was. She was stuck at an intersection about half a mile away. I was not sure what I could do at this point. I couldn't just start running because I had my bag and cat carrier on me. I decided to call my driver again and ask if I could stay on the line with her until she got there. I could tell she was a little bit confused, but I didn't want to go into detail right there. If this guy really was trouble, I wanted to make sure he didn't do anything sudden if he realized I'd caught on to him. However, I did not want to call the police directly because I didn't think I had enough to report him yet. I also didn't want to walk anywhere else because the surrounding area wasn't lit as well as where I was already standing. For some of you, this may not sound like the scariest experience. For me, however, being alone at night in a big city with a human trafficking problem and suddenly having a strange man stare at me and call to tell someone what I looked like, it scared me. Big time. He hung up his phone after continuing for a few minutes, but thank God my ride got there only a minute later. I'm not sure I want to know what would have happened if that driver had canceled on me too. This is technically my mother's story, although I am also in it. When I was about 4 months old in 1994, my mom and dad had been having money issues, and as a result, he would often work late. On a late Wednesday night around 9 p.m., there was a knock at the door. My mom put me down in the living room and went to see if it was my dad having forgotten his keys or something. She opened the door without looking properly. It was a man standing on the doorstep. He smiled at her and asked if he could use our phone as his car had broken down. Flustered, she said yes, and walked backward a little to let him get to the telephone that lived on the hall table. However, he did not stop at the table. He kept walking up the hall towards her. She asked him what he wanted, pointed at the phone saying it was right there, and said her husband was just getting out of the shower. This is when it started to get really creepy. He stopped walking, cocked his head to one side, and said he couldn't hear the shower running. He then gave her a really big smile. He added that it was just her home right now, wasn't it? My mom said at this point all she could think about was trying to make it to me, maybe dropping me out a window, trying to get us into the bathroom that had a lock, praying to any god or gods that were listening that my dad would just pull up into the driveway. Anything. Then she heard a growl. My mom had been out getting the wash in from the outside laundry before she'd gone in to check on me in the living room and had left the back door open just a crack. Our Doberman Pride had gotten into the house and had walked out of the kitchen into the hallway between Mum and this man. She started growling, showing all her teeth. My mom told him to get out now before she set the dog upon him. Apparently he freaked out and backed out of the house before taking off down the street. Dad got home about 20 minutes later. Felt like an eternity according to Mum. The man was never caught though, and we never saw him again. I really hope I never do, even though I wouldn't even know if I saw him. Pride lived until she was 13 and was the most spoiled dog ever. I don't know what would have happened to Mum or me without her though. This story happened about 5 years ago in a fairly small town in Illinois. I was 26 years old at the time. My husband and I were looking to rent a small house. We needed a place bigger than our one bedroom. At least one that would accommodate us and 2 of his cousins. It would be staying with us for an extended vacation from another country. I went to look at a set of attached houses and was joined on my tour by another older woman. She asked me what I did for work, and I told her I worked with children with special needs. She told me she had a son with a disability, and if we both moved in, I could help him. I didn't think much more of it at the time. Flash forward a few weeks, and we're in the middle of the move-in process. The houses occurred in groups of 4, with 2 groups on the left side of the street and 2 on the right, making up a total of 16 houses. The road was basically a dead end. We moved into the second house of the quad on the right side, and the lady I toured with moved into the second on the left side, exactly across from us. On either side of our house was a family with children, grandparents raising a 13-year-old granddaughter and a Brady Bunch-type step-family raising multiple children, with at least 2 to 3 teen/preteen girls. This matters later, I promise. Everyone around seemed friendly and family-oriented. A few weeks after we moved in, we were waiting for his cousins to arrive. I saw the lady I toured with occasionally, but never saw a small child with a disability. She did have what appeared to be an adult son living with her, mid-20s, average height, slightly bulky. He often sat on patio furniture in his garage with the door up. When I was coming home or leaving, we would wave and say hi, but that was about the extent of our interaction. A lot of the people in the neighborhood use their garages as patios, in fact. It was kind of weird, but I can't really explain it. One night at about 3 a.m., I'm in graduate school and stay up all hours of the night studying. My husband works midnights at a Toyota factory and wouldn't be home for about 4 hours. I had just laid down about 20 minutes before, but was not quite asleep yet. It was sure gonna suck at 6:30 a.m., but 4 hours a night was about the norm back then. All of a sudden, I heard this loud knock at the door. I went to answer it. There was no peephole, but about 2 feet away was an oversized set of windows that looked into the living room. They were covered in blinds, and peeking out was clearly noticed by the person at the door. I decided to skip this process and just talk through the door. I'll stop here and say that I'm inherently naive. I trust everyone, but I'm getting somewhat better about it since we've moved to a city since this occurred. On the other side of the door was the neighbor's adult son. He told me that his mother had left for work and he'd forgotten his keys. If I could just let him borrow my phone to call his mother. I went to unlock the door, justifying that I knew this man from the neighborhood, and I wanted to do my best to help. At the last second, though, my brain finally kicked in. I told him I'd dial the number for him, and went to get my phone. When I went to return, I could see the handle jiggling. Why I didn't stop then? I don't know. Instead, I asked him for the number. I still don't know why I didn't open the door. I'm very naive, but something stopped me. He rattled off this bunch of random numbers. The area code wasn't right, and it wasn't enough to make a full telephone number anyway. I asked him to repeat it, thinking maybe I'd misheard. Instead, he said, "Oh, that's okay. My mom just pulled up anyway." Remember, his house is directly parallel to mine. I looked out the window. I could see no one had arrived. The garage door isn't up, no car is in the driveway, no lights are on. He just walked over and walked directly into the home from the front door. After taking a few deep breaths, I tried to decide if I should call 911, or if maybe I was being a bit paranoid. Maybe somehow I'd missed his mom's arrival. This wasn't possible, but I did not want to think about the alternative. At that moment, a police car pulled up with the lights on, though. The couple on the left side of this man's house was a young lesbian couple who coincidentally worked with my husband. They came out to meet the police. I also got out, thinking I could at least ask him to follow up once whatever he was called for was resolved. Turns out, the man had tried to open their door and walk in. Because they also work midnights but had a day off, they also kept late hours. They were watching TV when they heard him and called the cops. I told the police my story as well and went back to bed. I figured I was overreacting because the officer didn't ask me to make a statement or otherwise record my issue. More of an "I'll check this all out, little ladies" type of thing. Well, the next day, I'm talking to the grandmother of the 13-year-old and the mother with multiple kids that live on either side of me. Apparently, he was watching their daughters playing outside and had even asked one to come over and sit on his lap in the garage. The grandmother said he'd tried to open the bedroom window of the girl, but it was locked, thankfully. I don't know if they reported this to the police, but they said he was asked to move by the landlord. His mother could stay, but he wasn't allowed to live there or visit. After that, things calmed down a bit. We did notice tool marks on the back door, which opened directly into the master bedroom. I know for a fact those marks weren't there when we moved in, as I took pictures of everything to ensure we were returned our deposit. I didn't observe them until a few weeks later, after he was already gone. I can't say for sure if he did it prior or if it was someone else later. Not like either is a very comforting choice. Many months later, near the end of our 1-year lease, I started to see the son around again. He wasn't consistently at the home like before, but appeared to visit once a week or so. One night during 2:30 a.m., there was a loud knock at the door. This time, my husband, who had switched to a daytime shift by that time, answered through the door. As soon as the person on the other side heard a male voice, they turned and immediately started to walk away. They were wearing a hoodie and dark clothes, and I couldn't see the face. The body type was similar, though. The person walked at an angle away from our house, in the general direction of the back of the neighbor's home. It was unclear if he was walking toward a creek/swamp area with an open field behind, or to the back row of houses across from us. Either way, I called the landlord the next day. He confirmed the man wasn't supposed to live there, said he had mental challenges, but didn't elaborate. He said he would follow up. We never saw the guy again and luckily moved across the country a few weeks later. So, mentally challenged neighbor who I think is probably a pedophile, let's not meet again. Back in 2008, I was a student planning to go to university and needed some extracurricular stuff I could put on my entry applications. As most UK students know, one of the best to have on there is the Duke of Edinburgh Award. As a part of this award, you have to embark on an orienteering expedition, basically a long trek through woodland and rural villages, following nothing but a map and compass. No GPS allowed. It's basically a teamwork experience. You camp and overcome hurdles together. Anyway, I was out of shape at the time, and so my uncle volunteered to take me out to the middle of nowhere to get some idea of what orienteering was like. We didn't stay out overnight like I would have had to during the real thing. We hiked maybe about 10 miles through woods in a small village in pretty abysmal weather. By the end of the journey, we were both soaked to the bone and pretty damn miserable, looking forward to getting back to the car and just heading home. For the last part of the journey, we were on a dirt trail leading uphill with bushes and trees on either side. We were marching onward in silence at this point, when all of a sudden, there was a rustling in the foliage just to our left. From behind a large bush stepped an old man, dressed in a black suit with a red bow tie and dress shoes. He looked late 70s, early 80s maybe, very pale, liver spots dotting his face, and a gray-white comb-over. I was instantly weirded out. Who dresses like that to go into the woods? The instant thought seeing a guy his age out there in those clothes in those particular weather conditions was, this guy's lost his marbles. There was something else that took me an extra moment to notice though, that puzzled me quite a bit. This guy was bone dry. He didn't even have mud on his shoes. We stopped in our tracks and just stared at the man for a moment. He appeared to be as shocked and frozen at seeing us as we were of him. My uncle made the first move though, taking a step towards him, asking him if he was all right. The man continued to stare for a moment, not even moving a twitch. Suddenly though, he became very animated. It was like he just snapped out of a trance. He started flailing his arms wildly, saying something awful had just happened, that a good friend of his needed his help. He began walking backwards into the woods, motioning for us to follow behind him, which we did. We started off at a brisk walk, then escalated to running as we struggled to keep pace with this old man. After maybe a minute or so, he disappeared ahead of us. We could still hear him moving around though, so we continued to follow the noise until we reached this huge slope. We looked at the edge and looked down to see the old man standing at the very bottom, motioning us and pleading with us to follow him. I remember looking down. The slope was probably at least a 40-degree angle, spanned for perhaps 50 feet or more, and was very slick with mud. It looked like an accident waiting to happen, especially given that there were no shrubs or roots to hold on to or anything. I remember looking down at the old man on the other side of the slope and wondering, how did he just cross that so quickly and cleanly? I mean, at that distance, it was hard to see fine detail clearly, but I swear he still did not appear wet or muddy at all. My uncle and I looked at each other skeptically, and I saw that he was getting as weirded out as I was. Despite my feelings, though, I made a step toward the edge and was going to try to make my way down when my uncle grabbed me firmly by the arm and pulled me back. Under his breath, he said to me, "Something's wrong here." We took a few steps back from the edge at this point. The old man at the bottom started getting very irate. He began pleading with us again to please come down the slope, telling us he needed our help right now. His friend was in real trouble. My uncle shouted down to the man that we would head back to our car and call emergency services for him. Professional help would be on its way soon. They would have all the tools needed to help him. The old man suddenly got furious. He began jumping up and down, demanding we come down the slope right now, or there would be hell to pay. His voice had changed drastically. He was practically growling his words, his hands bunched into fists, pounding his knees like an angry toddler throwing a tantrum. I've never seen a grown adult fly into such a pathetic rage in my life. His eyes looked like they were on the verge of bursting from the sockets. His skin had gone from pale to bright red in an instant. We hurriedly made our way back the way we came, his demands and threats getting less audible as we got closer to the trail. Once on the trail, we practically power marched the remaining quarter-mile or so to the car. All the while, my uncle was on the phone to the emergency services, explaining to them that there was possibly a mentally ill old man stuck on the trail. We were ordered to get to our car and await the police, so we could show them where we had encountered him. About an hour later, we met 4 officers, 2 of whom had dogs with them, and packs of supplies like first aid, emergency blankets, etc. We led them to the exact spot. and then pointed the 2 officers with dogs in the direction he led us through the bushes. The search lasted all weekend, but there was no trace of the old man. The officers said the only trail they could pick up had been mine and my uncle's. They didn't see any footprints or anything belonging to that old man we'd encountered. This is one of my weirdest experiences to date. This all started with a fairly normal day at work. I worked at a small grocery store at the time, and my duties consisted of gathering shopping carts in the parking lot and bagging groceries. Just the normal minimum wage stuff. It was particularly rainy that morning, and of course, I was assigned to carts all day. About 2 hours into my shift, I saw a man rushing to get his groceries into the car. It was completely pouring out. I ran over to him and started helping him with his bags. "It's pouring," I said. "Mind if I help you get out of the rain?" "Yes, thank you so much." As he was closing his trunk, he looked at me with a very surprised look on his face. He lowered his eyebrows, looked me up and down, and smirked. "Hey, are you a new hire, perhaps?" "Oh, no, I've been here a couple of months." "Oh, well, you're very pretty," he said in a weirdly sensual tone. Thank you. Have a good day." I shut it down. I was not interested. As I was walking back to the store to hide until he left, I could feel him watching me as I walked away. Nevertheless, I continued to work, not really thinking too much about it after. After my lunch, I was at the register bagging groceries when I noticed the same exact man from earlier walk in. I pretended I did not see him and just kept bagging. He came up to the register and got a single chocolate bar. I didn't give him a bag. He stood towering over me and said, "Aren't you going to bag my item?" "Oh, sorry, I didn't know you wanted a bag for one little thing." I put his chocolate bar in a bag and told him to have a good day. "So, when are you off work, sweetheart?" "Oh man, I'm not really comfortable giving that information out." "That's okay. You've been here, what, maybe 5 hours? Probably get off around 6 or 7, right?" He smiled, winked at me, and walked away. Disgusted, I went to my manager and told her what had happened. She told me not to work the lot anymore and to ask someone to walk me to my car. By the end of my shift, I had a male coworker walk me to my truck and we scanned the parking lot, looking for this man's car. We didn't see him, so my coworker went back inside and I started up my truck. I called my mom to tell her about what had happened. Once she answered, I left the parking lot finally. Literally the second I turned onto the road, though, I saw his car pull onto the road behind me. I told my mom I thought he was going to follow me. She told me to just drive around a bit and try to lose him. I drove around for about 20 minutes, just going in random circles around my town. I hit a red light, and he pulled up next to me and started yelling something to me out his open window. I, of course, pretended he wasn't there, but I could still hear what he was saying. "You know, you would bear some good kids for me. You'd make a great slave, little lady." He then started being very explicit about what he was going to do to me if he managed to catch me. I told my mom I was going to call 911, and if I wasn't home in an hour, to call the police. While I was trying to do this, the man sped ahead of my truck and started to brake check me. Frantic, I waited for the closest intersection and turned up the block. My phone fell under my seat while I was turning, so I decided to go to the nearest open establishment and run inside and hide to have someone else call 911. The closest open business I could find was a convenience store at a gas station. I pulled in, parked, and ran for my life into the store. I told the clerk what was happening. She took me into the break room and locked me in there. While processing that I might have survived this ordeal, I could hear the doors of the storefront start violently rattling. Before I knew it, the clerk had locked herself in the break room too. She was on the phone with the police, and they were now on their way. We were silent there, cowering in that dark room together. I found myself guilty for wrapping another woman into our worst fear. My thoughts were racing through what I'd said to him. Did I lead him on? No, I just told him to have a good day. Has he been following me for longer than tonight? How did he know what car I drive? Are the police going to get here in time? Are we going to die? Finally, the small room was illuminated with red and blue lights from the crack under the door. We heard a voice over the intercom telling us it was now safe to come out. Shaking, the clerk took out her keys and opened the door. We walked out and gave our statements. After the police left, I turned to my unexpected savior and profusely thanked her. We cried, hugged, and she walked me to my car. The next night, I went back and bought her some food and an Amazon gift card. Now, I've been in a near-fatal accident, 10 feet away from a mountain lion in the wild, and I'm a survivor of sexual assault. I can tell you with total honesty, I thought that was the end of the line. Thank you for reading. Be aware, stay cautious, and stay safe. For context, I'm a 26-year-old male and have a larger build. Not fat, but also not muscular. Just a bigger look to me. I've lived an unusual life and have been through many iffy situations with people, so I'm not frightened easily by odd or wacky people. I can also defend myself pretty well in a fight. I live in a city with pretty bad crime and work on a sketchy side of town. While not the most crime-filled, it was still sketchy enough that you'd get shady people around once in a while. I'm also a fan of the dark, so I love walking at night and do not get scared that easily. I work a second shift job. It's my duty as one of the supervisors to lock the gates after the sun goes down, and all the day shift people are gone. Our work is enclosed with a fence that has barbed wire on top. Just a few days ago, I was walking to close the gate. I was coming from the far side of the parking lot after throwing something away in the dumpster. As I was walking, I could see a strange man on a bike in the distance. It was dark and cold out at this time of year, especially at 8 p.m., so I found it odd to see a man that was at least 30 or 40 riding around on a bike randomly. I carried on though. Maybe it was just a man going to work or leaving from work who didn't have a car. As I continued to walk, I saw he was now doing circles in the road at the end of the little driveway that leads to the fence. Now my guard was up. This was quite strange. As I reached the fence, he had now set down the bike and was staring directly at me. He began walking toward me. He was shaking profusely, like I've seen many people on drugs do before. I was still not super worried. I've dealt with many shady people before after all. I closed one side of the gate quickly and rushed to the other side, swinging it closed. The gate is locked by a chain and a padlock, so I grabbed both sides of the chain. Before I could get the padlock in though, the man stuck his hands through the fence and grabbed me by the shirt. At this point I yelled, "Get the fuck off of me before I beat your ass!" As it was, I was holding the fence closed with just the chains while he grabbed me and kept yelling he was going to kill me. The only thing that was going through my mind was how exactly I was going to get the upper hand on this dude. Should I fight him? Should I wrap the damn chain around his neck? I was fortunate. A police officer just happened to turn the block as this was going down. He flipped his lights on and quickly took down the man and cuffed him. While the man was in his car, he questioned me and got a statement, and I was on my way. It all happened so fast in just a moment. So, to the druggie who wanted to kill me, even though I know I'll run into more one way or another, let's not meet again. So this happened just a little bit over 2 years ago now. I wanted to post it somewhere just to look back on it one day and never forget the lesson I learned. It was 2016. I had just started a new job at a motel. It was low pay, but I needed an office job. One of my friends, Michael, got me this job. For a few days, I did training with the owner in the mornings. For 2 nights, Michael trained me. Our job was the 11 p.m. to 7 a.m. shift. Nothing particularly exciting, just checking guests in and doing a bunch of paperwork. My boss, the owner, went away with his wife on vacation for a week, which is attributed to the swift training I had to endure. So, it was my first night alone on the night shift. There was a monitor with security cameras around the motel's property and large glass windows all around the office building with a glass door. There was no night window like most motels have. It was fairly early in the night at about 1 a.m. I was just doing my normal check-in paperwork when a man walked in and asked if we had any rooms available. Usually, if someone is sketchy, my boss has me lie and say no, but this man seemed normal at the moment. Without hesitation, I said, "Yes, of course. Is that just for one?" He replied with an affirmative. I began creating the reservation on the computer when I noticed he started swatting the air and making spitting noises, as if he was suddenly being surrounded by flies. I tried to ignore it. As far as I was concerned, that sort of thing wasn't any of my business. I tried to check him into the room as quickly as possible. I gave him his key and he was on his way. At this point in time, I could be described as very timid. I had a lot going on in my personal life. I hope you can all understand my reaction to what happens next. The man came back from his room and slammed his hand on the glass door and caused me to jump. Absolutely frightened, I looked up to see him staring at me. He cracked the door and put his head through and said, "I can't get into my room. Why won't you let me into my room?" My only defense was trying to be helpful, so I replied, "Maybe there's something wrong with your key. Let me give you another one." The look he had in his eyes was inexplicable. I could just feel I was in absolute danger. I handed him his new key. He went back to his room. I tried texting Michael because he was the one who trained me, though it was the middle of the night and he was fast asleep. I needed some guidance. With no reply from Michael, though, I noticed the man trudging down the stairs to come back. I went into absolute panic mode. I ran into the back office and locked the door and pulled out my pocket knife. It's important to keep protection when working alone at night. I heard the man wander into the office and start yelling, "Hello? Hello? Why won't you let me into my room? Do you not like me?" Me being an absolute idiot and not standing my ground and calling the police when I'm feeling scared, I decided to try and take on this situation alone. "No, I'm on the phone. I'll be right out." I then started calling Michael over and over for help. No answer. I decided to take a few deep breaths and then step out of the office. The man was not there. He was in the bathroom. I began to hear him whispering to himself, angrily, "Kill her. Kill her." My heart sank. Still being an idiot and not calling the police, he came out. Your key was broken. I'm sorry. Let me escort you to your room." He agreed, thankfully. I was wearing a long-sleeved sweater, so with my arms down, I was able to hide my knife in my hand while holding it. I began to walk outside. He seemed insistent to walk behind me. We began making our way to the staircase and up towards his room. I was sweating from how nervous I was, continuously looking behind me to make sure he wasn't going to make a move suddenly. He stopped at a room, and I stopped at his room a few doors down from that. I smiled at him. "Oh, that's the wrong room. This is your room, sir," as it clearly said on the door. The whole time he was trying to get into someone else's room and trying to bust open the door. I felt really bad for them. I quickly ran back to the office and locked the door. The next guest I checked in was a police officer from a few towns away. I felt bad for confiding in them about this guy, but they seemed willing to help and keep an eye out. The next night the man came back, but I had the doors locked. I told him we were all booked up. I explained to my boss what happened when he got back from vacation. However, he did not take me seriously. I continued to work there on the night shift for the next year, where many other strange encounters happened. So, strange man, let's never meet again. And if you ever feel uncomfortable, always call the police. House sitting and taking care of the dogs for my aunt. It was an old farmhouse. Old as in the kitchen and bathroom were added onto the house when working plumbing first became a common thing. I played some video games, watched a little bit of TV, just winding down to go to sleep. Just laying there in the dark, trying to start to doze off, when I heard something. Something coming from upstairs. The upstairs was an attic turned into bedrooms for my cousins. The best way I could describe it was like a pipe or a bottle or something. Some kind of hollow object rolling back and forth across the floor in the room directly above me. I sat there wide-eyed and scared shitless. Finally, I worked up the courage to get up and turn the lights back on. The rolling sound continued. I told myself it must just be something in the walls, trying to come up with any rational explanation. I got up to turn the TV back on and just kinda tried to drown out the sound. With the lights on, I noticed the dogs, 2 big Rottweilers, were sitting silently in the kitchen, hair bristling and staring right at me. I backed away. Honestly, I was afraid they were going to attack me for some reason. I realized, though, that they were not staring at me. They were looking past me, at the door that goes upstairs. Well, shit. That did nothing to settle my nerves, but there was no way in hell I was going up to investigate alone. I cranked up the TV, eventually coaxed the dogs into the living room, and after a while I was tired again. I left the TV on, just turned it down, laid back down on the couch and got some shut-eye. I don't know how long I was asleep, just that when I woke up, it was still pitch black outside. What woke me up was the door. My feet were hanging over the arm of the couch I was sleeping on, and the door that led upstairs had come open and smacked against my foot. If you've ever lived in an old house, you'll know this kind of door. It's a very old door, the kind that's been warped from too many winters and rubs the frame when you shut it. The kind you would have to put your shoulder into to close it all the way, and would really have to pull to open it once again. Yet here it was, wide open to a pitch-black staircase, the hinges creaking as it bumped against my dangling feet. I was up and out in seconds, the dogs right behind me. I put my shoes on in the car, put the dogs in their kennel, and was off to sweet, sweet civilization. I didn't care about using all the gas to drive out and feed the dogs every day. I was not spending another night in that house. When my parents got divorced, my mother moved to a nice lake house. She bought it from a widow whose husband had recently died of lung cancer. We're not sure if he passed away in the house, but we do know that during his last years, he would only stay in the house when he wasn't at the hospital. The couple had no children and no other family. My sister and I assume he passed away or spent most of his time on the second story, where our 2 bedrooms and bathroom were. I would often feel like someone was watching me in my room at night, and would hear creaks from my dresser, as if someone was leaning on it. My sister felt the same way, but about someone sitting in a chair in her room while it creaked. We would both awake in the middle of the night with this eerie feeling we were being watched. Some doors would seem to close when we did not recall opening or closing them. My bedroom entrance had 2 double doors that opened inward to the room, a walk-in closet door that opened inward toward the closet, a door to the bathroom that opened outward towards the room with a double sink for my sister and I, and a door to a room with shower and toilet that opened inward. There was also a door from my sister's room to where the sinks were, and a door to her bathroom. The important thing to recognize is that all of these doors open in different directions. One night as I was getting ready for bed, I thought I heard something move. I quickly turned around and looked in the mirror that was behind me. Immediately upon making eye contact with my reflection, all of the second-floor doors slammed shut. Bam, 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 all at the same time. 6 swift slams echoed across that house. There was no window open, no air conditioner on, no fan since it was Minnesota in the winter, and the double doors that had been open had slammed shut together. I felt trapped and ran to jiggle the double door handle. I managed to get it open and fled, running down the stairs. A few months later, I was heading upstairs toward my bedroom after dinner. My sister had been on the computer in my room before when it was lights out. But as it got darker while we ate, the only light on in my bedroom was radiating dully from the old iMac in my room. As I got inside, I thought I saw something move. Again, the only light was from the dull blue computer screen though. I turned to hit the light switch, but I thought I saw something move out of the corner of my eye again, so I stopped with my hand on the switch. Within the light cast by the computer, there was a shadow that was unfamiliar, and it began to move. It was 2 shadows really, and they looked just like legs. Slowly, the 2 shadows moved again, and I realized they were walking toward me. It was almost transparent, like light shining through wax paper. As they approached me, I screamed and threw the light switch, and there was nothing there. I never slept on the 2nd floor again. I'm sure all of these things had logical explanations, but they freaked me out at the time. I don't know if I believe in ghosts in the most widely accepted terms, but I'm sure there are things out there which science has yet to discover. When I was about 8, I was going to bed in my room when a gray thing about the size of a football slowly moved across the foot of my bed, pulling blankets as it went. It dipped down when it got to the end, and I couldn't find any trace of it even though I looked. We had cats, but my door was closed and none of them were in my room at the time. My parents wouldn't believe me no matter what I said. I can't say I would have if it were one of my kids. I was terrified for ages. In the same room as the previous event, I had this door which opened to a screened porch type thing. There was no other way to get into it, as it was locked many times from the inside at the other exit. Every so often, this door would just randomly make a sound, just like someone throwing their whole body into it. A big thump with various elements, as if different limbs were striking at different times. It was a pretty defined someone is on the other side type noise, not just the normal creaks and pops of an old New England home. This happened during any time of the day too, or night. One evening, it just kept happening, over and over, like someone was really trying to break their way into my room. I was so scared that I made my dad check it out while I stood behind to see, but there was nothing. No one was there. He closed it up, locked the door, and went about his business. Then it started again. Quietly at first, building up to these loud crashes. Had Dad check again. Again, nothing there. I have no idea what it was, but it was sure freaky as hell. In the same house, there were lots of little things which I'm sure had more to do with being a freaked out kid than anything else. I had many instances of terrible sleep paralysis, where I could feel something grabbing lightly at my feet, or pushing on my belly and chest. I would often see cats skirt about my feet or around doorways when there was no animal there. I would hear these angry, indecipherable whispers when sleeping in the living room. Creepy old house stuff. During that same period, but this was at my friend's house, she lived in a 2-family home on the top floor. They shared an attic with a stairway up to it which was next to her room. Her downstairs neighbor was an elderly woman and lived there for many years. After she died, we would often hear very human-sounding footsteps in the attic, but not going up the stairs behind her room to the attic, which were normally very audible. When I was pregnant with my first child, we lived in a small house in New Mexico. One day I was sitting on my computer when our dog started barking in the yard. I turned to look out the window, and as I did this, I saw what I thought was our dog walk from the front door past the couch and into the bedroom, only to then realize that our bedroom door was closed and our dog was outside. That one actually still freaks me out a bit, as I was an adult when it happened, but I'm sure there are also easy explanations for these sorts of things. Still freaky. A few years ago, I had another experience living in a new home in Texas. I was home alone with the kids and my husband was out of town for work. It was the middle of the day, so not exactly prime freaking out condition. Then something bangs on the house from the outside. Not unusual. Could be anything, really. Then it happens again on the other side. Then the back door. And it keeps going around the house in circles and gets faster. It was too quick for it to have been someone running in circles around the house. I finally got the nerve to open the back door and look. But of course, there was nothing there. It stopped immediately after I looked, though. Gave me a real pit in my stomach. For me, there are two things I cannot explain. One, I was 14. The first week after my family moved into a new house, I woke up in the middle of the night to find a man staring down at me in bed. He was short, somewhat portly, perhaps Italian, older and balding. He wore a plaid shirt with yellow in it and blue jeans. I freaked the fuck out, of course, and hid underneath the covers while saying some prayers. When I finally peeked out again, he was just gone. Years later, as in 10 years later, I decided to tell this story to my family at the dinner table. My dad suddenly turned white and asked me more questions about this man. Was he wearing yellow? Blue jeans, perhaps? I felt my blood run cold. Yes, he was. My dad then said he'd seen the same man twice, once in his master bathroom. He looked up in the mirror to find the man staring back at him right behind him, and once in his master closet he walked in to find the man just staring there facing the clothing rack. Regarding the closet as well, I had a weird experience when I was maybe 18 or 19. I was in the master bedroom watching TV because someone was using the TV downstairs. I didn't like staring into the dark closet because I'm afraid of dark enclosed spaces like that. I got up to close it, pulled the door closed, but then the door was yanked out of my hand, and a male gruff voice demanded, "What?" As in, what do you want? It wasn't the TV either. I was watching the Weather Channel, and it had music playing on the forecast. I ran downstairs and told what happened to my mother. I refused to go back into that closet again. And one final experience. The second house I lived in was a new subdivision. The town was on the shores of Lake Ontario, on land previously inhabited by the Iroquois native people. Subdivisions always had to be investigated by archaeologists in case a significant site was discovered. All the construction constantly unearthed pottery, arrowheads, etc. So, when I was 3, we moved into that house. It isn't my experience, but my dad's. He had set up his weightlifting equipment in the back of the unfinished basement. One day, while he was bench pressing, he opened his eyes to suddenly find a native Canadian man staring grimly down at him, wearing animal skins and bird feathers. My dad freaked out, sat up and tried to say something, but when he looked around, the man was gone. I was maybe 11 when this happened. My dad was at a conference in Vancouver for the weekend, and so it was just my mom and me at home. I got up in the middle of the night to go to the bathroom. All the lights in the house were off. I turned on the bathroom light and closed the door, at least mostly. I did my business and went to go wash my hands. I looked in the mirror to see what looked like toothpaste speckles in the reflection of the crack in the door. I'm still washing my hands when I realized, no way, I definitely washed the mirror just today. Curiosity grabbed me, and I turned 180 to look in the crack at the door. Boom. Someone was looking back at me, eye to eye. She didn't look happy to see me either. It was a girl, maybe early teens. Her hair was really lank and thin, almost greasy looking. She was probably a little bit overweight or had a really flat/round face. She was wearing what I knew to be a purple dress, except she appeared to be in grayscale. You know, at night colors are different, so maybe that's why it didn't tip me off immediately. She had these glasses on with thin wire frames. I remember distinctly because my mom wears the same type of glasses. My immediate thought was, what is mom doing up? Maybe she has to go to the bathroom too or something. Wait, why is mom wearing her glasses in the middle of the night? Oh shit, I can't see the TV through my mom. Instantly, I froze in terror. I stood in my bathroom for what felt like half an hour, trying to figure out what to do and get the mental fortitude to do it. Eventually, I figured I'd better just deal with this, so I ripped the door open with everything I had. I can only describe it as wisping, like how when you blow out a candle, the smoke dissipates into the air. She did that. I stood in the open bathroom doorway for what was probably another minute, but felt like years. I got up the courage to go down the hall, into my bedroom, and turned all the lights on and read until sunrise. There may have been other less descriptive and intense experiences in my house as well, but that one was more text than I thought it would be already. This might get a bit long, so sorry in advance. A dorm at a local university had a student die of alcohol poisoning on his 21st birthday. There have been lots of reports of creepy things happening in the room he died in. Students reported tapping from the inside of the window, shoes being rearranged while they were out, and a loud scraping noise that came from upstairs. People upstairs thought it was coming from downstairs. Anyways, there's a youth sports camp that uses this dorm for a summer residence. I was a counselor, so I stayed in the dorm with the kids. I was assigned to stay in the room that the aforementioned student died in. I grew up in the same town as this college, so I knew all about the ghost and didn't really think anything of it. There's no such thing as ghosts, right? I moved in. The only thing that looked different about the room compared to others in the dorm was that there was a crucifix. During my week, shit got weird. Several times I heard loud tapping from the inside of my window. One night I poked my head outside my door late one night and yelled lights out to some kids running down the hall. My lights promptly turned out inside my own room. Finally, during a break at the end of the week, I went back to my room for a nap. I found my TV was on and the volume was extremely loud. I didn't think much of it. Maybe the kids had been playing PS2 in my room and forgotten to turn it off or something. I grabbed the remote, laid on the bed, and hit the power button, but the TV stayed on. I took the batteries out, put in new ones, tried again. Still, the TV was on. I picked my lazy ass up finally and walked to the TV. I pressed the power button, but nothing happened. I turned the volume down. Still nothing. I finally unplugged the TV, but it did not turn off. Totally freaking out, I unplugged the cable cord, thinking there was some weird surge through that was keeping the TV on. Nope. I sat there holding the TV power cord, the cable cord, and the remote, and watched my TV continue to play. I ran from the room and got another counselor and showed them. He promptly freaked the fuck out too, and we left the building to get the camp director. When he got to my room, though, the TV was off. Fuck. I was born for this, literally. When I was born, my family lived in an older house. I'm British, so when I mean old, I mean very old. When I was a kid, a young girl used to look after me in my bed. She would always come and look down at me and smile. One night I was trying to sleep, but she kept poking me and pushing me. I was very young, so it made me cry. My parents were pissed off by it and came into the room, took my bed downstairs and put me down there, hoping I would give up crying and go to sleep. When my dad left the room, though, she came back and kept on prodding me and poking me until I started crying again. After a little while, my dad came down, and just before he came into the room, she smiled and disappeared. When my father came in, he said there was smoke coming from the floor and ran everyone out of the house. Turns out there was an electrical fault underneath, and the house had almost caught fire. A little later on after this, my father was up a ladder fixing something on the side of the house. The ladder suddenly fell over, and he broke his leg. To this day, he swears something hit the ladder. Whenever anyone went into the loft, it would always feel cold, and like someone was watching you. The final straw was when my mother woke up in the middle of the night and sat up to see a young girl staring at her. I think it was the same girl who used to look down at me. My mother felt that this was a warning from her and that we had to leave. We did that morning. The next day, the top floor collapsed into the lower floor, almost destroying the entire house. I've never really been sure if that girl was looking out for me or tormenting me. But bad things only ever happened to me, my brother, or my dad. Never my mother. After we left, the next family to move in had a son. He was born brain damaged. Take from that what you will. About 10 years later, my father died for about 10 minutes from a blood clot. I asked him about it afterwards, and he said he felt like he was lying on the ceiling looking down at himself. He decided it was not the right time to die and decided to live. For a couple of years afterward, strange things happened to him. We were driving down a road. For those who have never been to England, these are fast roads, 60-mile-per-hour speed limit, but not motorways. They tend to meander and have roads join them in odd places. As we were driving down the road, my father looked up at a car coming from a road to the right and said, "I need to stop." He pulled to a stop, but the other car didn't. It careened straight across the road over the small embankment on the other side. If my father had not stopped, I shudder the thought. The car would have hit the side I was sitting on, killing me for sure. Afterwards, he said he heard someone saying he needed to stop. Let's go on a few years, skipping some minor events and going to the next big one. I went to grammar school in a crazy school that was converted from an old hospital. The library was the old chapel. The art room was an old ward room, and the classrooms were converted from offices and old labs. It was a pretty crazy place. I was playing rugby after school and had a minor injury when another player accidentally stamped on my head. The nurse said I was okay to leave and called my father to come and get me. I went outside to wait for him at the main gates. As I waited, a taxi pulled up, and the driver yelled, "Taxi for Big Stouty." I thought, lazy son of a bitch sent a cab instead of coming himself. So I got in and went home. I got there and no one was there. I was a little confused but sat down to wait for my parents to come home. About 30 minutes after, the phone rang. It was my school, and everyone, including my father, was searching the grounds looking for me. There were no other big stonies in my school, and my father had never called a cab. Strange, possibly a coincidence. I found out later, on the way home, my father was delayed in traffic, where 2 cars had crashed 20 minutes earlier, just when we would have been driving home. I was visited almost every night by what I thought at the time was my deceased sister, from ages 11 to 16. I don't believe in the supernatural. I never have. But things happened to me that I honestly could not explain, neither at the time nor now. One thing's for sure, it was not my sister. I don't know what the fuck it was, but to this day I seriously doubt my sister would be sexually and physically assaulting me. I saw it one time when I was 16. I was laying on my bed, not asleep, just staring out my bedroom window because I couldn't bring myself to feel tired at all. I remember it was about 1:30 in the morning, and I'd gotten into a fight with my mother, coincidentally about staying up all night when I had school the next day. When I heard my door open, I immediately laid down and acted like I was asleep. I heard the familiar cracking of her toes as she was walking towards my bed. Her toes popped whenever she walked. I could hear her coming from across the whole house. I just laid there, pretending like I was not awake. I heard her voice. It was a rushed, low whispering. It wasn't until she was standing almost directly over me that I could hear she was frantically whispering my name over and over and over and over again. I remember my heart pounding in my chest. She was close enough to me. I could smell her, and she didn't smell like anything I've ever encountered before. It was like a mixture of rotten ground after a rainstorm and dead fish left in the sun for a week. I opened my eyes. I could see her illuminated in the moonlight from my window, but it wasn't my mother. What was lording over me was a woman that stood a little less than 6 feet tall, stringy, disgusting black hair that went a little bit past her shoulders. I remember the most horrifying things about her were that, 1. Aside from a disgustingly grime-covered sheer white dress, she was completely naked. I could see the dark points of her nipples through the material, and I'm assuming she wasn't wearing any underwear either. 2. Her exposed skin was diseased-looking, extremely frail and thin but looked tight, like a network of black veins stretching against it from underneath. She was white, but honestly more of like an off-green, like an egg that had gone bad. And 3. Her eyes. Her eyes were the most horrifying things I've ever seen to this day. They were like 4 sizes too large and perfectly round. Eyes that had no white, no color, just a solid jet black. The skin around these spherical nightmare windows was crinkled, with crusted flecks of something that looked black. She had fucking bug eyes, man, and they were hovering a half a foot away from my face. I didn't move. My body was stuck in Jesus fucking Christ mode. I couldn't even breathe through my terror. She bent over me and knelt onto my bed, and I felt the pressure. I felt the bed move as she rested her knees on either side of my waist. She lowered her face down to mine and touched her forehead to mine. Where the contact happened, it felt like my skin was burning. I still couldn't move. I couldn't breathe. I knew that if I opened my mouth, this whatever it was, because I don't think it was human, was going to tear out my soul and do who knows what with it. Oh yeah, did I mention the entire time this was going on she was grinding on my lap? The only sound in the room was the sound of my brain shrieking and the subtle shuffle of my bedding as this monster was frantically rubbing its crotch against my own. All I could see was its eyes, filling up my entire vision. I could smell its fishy, filthy hair as it brushed against the sides of my face. I got a surge of strength back in me. I rolled to the side trying to knock this thing off of me because I thought that maybe I could get it off if I could run. My bedroom had a door that led to the backyard in it. Maybe I could go out there and just run away. It clung to me. Now I had this writhing thing with its dirty fingernails digging into my back, sides, and arms. The paralysis set back in. I think it was then I realized that as long as this thing was making eye contact with me, I wouldn't be able to move out of fear. I tried to close my eyes, but I still couldn't move. I pissed myself in fear. I felt her hand reaching from across my back to my chest up to my throat, where it gripped me tightly behind the neck and held me with more force than anything has ever held me before. It removed its face from directly in front of mine, dragging its fetid, putrid hair in my face. I felt it press the smooth, tight skin of its own featureless face against my neck, like a swarm of flies pressing against my skin. Something wet and very cold touched me. I thought maybe this thing was licking me. Where it touched, it burned like the devil. Now I was not moving because I was terrified. Something sharp grazed my neck. Something sharp tore into my neck, but it was too late. Despite its scrambling hands and tearing nails, I booted this thing off of me and off of my bed. I immediately hauled ass to my closet, where I kept my machete that I used to clear brush, since I had a very overgrown backyard. It was clumsy, but really all I did was throw myself with as much force as I could off the end of the bed because my closet was right there. Machete out, I turned around, hauling my arm back because I was going to destroy this thing. And nothing there. I turned the light on after a serious internal pep talk. I grabbed the mattress futon and tore it off the lattice metal frame, machete poised to strike at the thing that must have scuttled underneath. Nothing. At this point, I was telling myself I must have had the worst sleep paralysis in the world. I pissed myself and should probably shower. I grabbed another set of PJs and staggered into the bathroom. I was bleeding. My neck had a gash in it about 3 inches long, right where the shoulder and neck meet. curving around my back. My forehead had a red splotch on it and the skin was peeling back like a bad sunburn. I turned around and surveyed the horror scene that was my back. It was like trenches had been caved in. My back, my sides, my hips. I showered with the curtain open. I turned on the kitchen light, turned on the library light, the living room light, and when I got to my bedroom, I opened the door and immediately turned on the bedroom light. Still empty. Although now that I know what to look for, I saw spatters of blood on my red quilt on my bed. I did not sleep that night, or the night after that, or the night after that. I told a select few people, but nobody believed me, even when I showed them how this thing turned my back and neck into a connect the dots with its nails. Everybody said I must have done those to myself in my sleep. But some of these marks were in spots I straight up can't reach myself. I still feel something sit down next to me while I'm laying in bed. I'll open my eyes and nothing will be there. I don't sleep more than 4 hours a night, and that's usually broken up into segments. I sleep better in other people's homes than I do my own. It's been a few years since I encountered anything like it, and only ever saw this that one time. But considering it started when I was 11, I don't think time is really a factor for whatever this thing is, and I'm convinced one day it will come back. I wish I could say this is some horror story I made up. I really do. I don't believe in the supernatural, but that doesn't mean this didn't happen, or that whatever that thing was isn't real. So I lived alone in a bad neighborhood just outside of the city. At this point, I had been living there for maybe 3 years or so, with no incident. Well, I mean, there were several shootings on my street, but no one shot at me. So, no incident, I guess. I'm the kind of person who can't sit still for very long, so I often find myself standing or pacing quite a lot. On this particular night, maybe about 2 a.m., I was pacing about while reading a textbook to prepare for an oncoming test at my university. I stopped pacing for just a minute and stood near my front door to read. That's when I suddenly heard my doorknob begin to turn. For some reason, though I nearly shit myself, I was able to calmly look down at my deadbolt to double-check that it was locked. It was. Whew. I looked through the peephole to see who was trying to come in, but no one was standing there. Obviously, this was very confusing. I'm neither superstitious nor a believer in the supernatural, but I'm also kinda stupid, so my first thought was, is a ghost trying to break into my house right now? Thankfully, though, that thought immediately gave way to a more logical school of thought. Maybe they're going around the back. I quickly moved to the back door to make sure it was locked as well. It was. Then my front door began to turn again. I tiptoe ran to the front door. At this point, my heart was pounding. My dog was staring at me from nearby with major concern in his eyes. I looked through the front peephole again, but there was still no one there. That's when I heard a small knock on my door as I was looking through the peephole. Then I heard a small child's voice cry out, "Let me in." Silence. "Let me in." I was still looking through the peephole while covering my mouth with my hand to make my breathing quieter. As I looked closer, I could see a small 3-year-oldish girl walk to the edge of my porch and look into the bushes. She nodded and then said, "Okay," in what I thought was supposed to be a whisper. She walked closer to the door again, and I lost sight of her in the peephole. She tried the handle once more and knocked, saying, "Please help me." My uncle is a cop, so I had heard about people using children as a way to get people to open their door before blitz attacking. I was pretty sure that's what was happening at this point. I wasn't sure how to handle this situation though, so I just said, not even into a phone, "Hi, yeah, I think someone is trying to break into my apartment. Yeah? My address? I'll stay on the line then." I then saw a shadow emerge from my bushes. Thankfully, they scooped the kid up and ran off. There were 2 people, plus the kid. People who tried to break into my apartment to rob or kill me? Let's not meet. 6 years ago, I was a new mom, learning to balance my job, family, and health. My social life primarily existed on the internet at this time. Facebook and Instagram were the main ways I kept in contact with others. I received a friend request from Steven, an old friend from high school. I accepted, and everything was normal for a while. After a couple of months, Steven sent a DM asking how I was. The conversation itself was fine, but it didn't take very long for me to realize that this was not the Steven I knew. They had the same first and common last name. His profile picture was not a picture of himself, so I never realized this was a different person. Either way though, we had several mutual friends and he didn't do anything especially creepy, so I figured it was no harm in leaving him on my friends list. He would occasionally message me for a friendly chat, and seemed like someone that was a bit socially awkward but fairly harmless. I would respond, but we would always keep the conversations quite brief. One day I got a text from him, which surprised me greatly because I never gave him my number. I asked him how he'd gotten it, and he said from my website, which I guess was fair. I am an artist and had an email and phone contact info on my art site. He began texting several times a day, and I would give short responses followed with something like, "At work, talk to you later," or "Dinner with the fam, have a good evening." He started talking about his new boyfriend, saying that he was one of the few gay conservatives and things were going quite well. I told him I was glad that he had a partner that aligned with him and wished him well. He then began talking a lot about conservative politics and was quite aggressive about it. I told him I was liberal, so it was probably best if we didn't have those kinds of conversations. His messages quickly began turning sexual, or he would ask if I wanted to hear about the sex parties him and his boyfriend threw. I told him no. I didn't really know him, and that was quite inappropriate. One day, I was busy with work, and returned to my phone to see dozens of messages from him, angry that I wasn't responding. He went on, sharing these very graphic sexual stories. I responded and told him I had been polite with him because he seemed like he didn't have many friends, but this was too much, and I was going to be blocking him. I told him I didn't even believe he was really gay. He was probably just saying it in an attempt to make me think he was harmless. I proceeded to block him on social media, and I blocked his phone number as well. A couple days later, I started getting lots of friend requests from accounts I didn't have mutuals with, and no friends. I knew they were probably fake pages he was creating. I would block them and move on. And then I began getting phone calls and texts from fake phone numbers. Same thing. I would block them right away and move on. I messaged our mutuals to ask what they knew about him, and it seemed that none of them actually knew him. The stories were all the same. One day he had just friend requested them out of nowhere and they accepted. He began sending requests to my friends, family, and even the other women in my dance troupe. I let everyone know they needed to block him. For months, not a day passed by that I did not get a weird call or friend request or DM. It would range from a normal "how are you" to vague threats of "I could make you talk to me if I really wanted to." He lived several hours away, so I wasn't particularly concerned about a physical confrontation. Things eventually got quieter, until one evening my notifications started going off like crazy, and my phone was ringing with tons of unknown numbers. It was on my art page. Probably 15 different accounts had posted porn on my page, or things like "OP is a whore," "OP is a thief." I knew it was him because he was also accidentally posting from his real account as well. I never realized that I didn't block him from that page. He also sent a message to my art page saying sorry for that, and he missed his friend and was just trying to get my attention. I didn't respond though. I blocked him and called the police. Of course, since stalking and harassment laws are notoriously awful, they didn't do anything. Later that night, I woke up at around 2 a.m. for no reason other than that I was just having trouble sleeping. I was up for a while playing on my phone when I started hearing this strange sound coming from the living room. It was back and forth between quiet cracking and scratching. At the time, we lived in a large ranch house, and the living room was at the other end of a long hall. I got up, thinking that my cats were into something, or maybe after a mouse. I flipped on the living room light, and the sound stopped. I scanned around looking for my cats, when I noticed an open window. Our windows were large, from floor to ceiling, and opened by pulling them down from the top. The top of the window still had pry marks on it, and the lock was clearly broken. Thankfully, this house was old, and the windows did not open easily. He had only been able to get it open about 8 inches. I woke my husband up, got my son out of his room, and called the police. I just knew it was Steven. It was too big of a coincidence that he blew up that day, and then someone tried to break into my house in the middle of the night. We couldn't prove it was him, though. There was no evidence other than what happened that day that pointed to him. The police spoke to him, and I believe that it scared him enough to finally leave me alone. I was obviously horrified at the time and began looking up anything I could find out about him. I wound up finding his YouTube channel, which solidified my fears even more. He would post these huge Rush Limbaugh-style rants, and he would get angrier and angrier until he was red-faced and nearly spitting. He frequently talked about violence as well, and would show off his gun collection. This led me to finding his real last name. I googled it, and found that he had been arrested 2 years prior for holding a woman against her will in a hotel as he attempted to assault her. Thankfully, she was able to escape with only a bloody lip. We moved not long after. I wanted neighbors and off the farm. I removed my phone number from my site and locked down all of my social media. I still sleep with a baby monitor in my son's room because I'm so scared of someone coming in at night. His YouTube channel shut down after a bit, and I haven't heard from him since. When I was 19, I lived abroad in Australia. As an American with our absurdly high age for drinking legally, I was completely new to drinking culture, going out and basically having independence. While I was definitely, sometimes a lot, on the naive side, my mother had impressed a healthy sense of caution into my thick teenage skull. Thank God she did, because while I was there, I was met with a very creepy encounter. I was roaming all alone on a weeknight through Chapel Street in Melbourne circa 2013. The area is full of bars and shops, and it was around 7 or 8-ish. A random man stopped me and asked what I was doing since he wasn't up to anything. He also told me I was cute. He claimed to be waiting for his wife and that he needed some company. I was caught off guard and opted to be nice because my societal training to be nice all the time. I remember though, immediately warning bells began quietly ringing. I kept trying to skirt out of the conversation, but he kept adding pressure to stay. I was inexperienced and not confident enough to feel sure of how to safely end this strange encounter I was in. He then introduced himself as Michael. While Michael roped me into stopping at a nearby bar, he wanted to buy me drinks, and kept trying to fish past the very vague details I was giving him, i.e., I work in this suburb and I live in this US state. Again, feeling pressure, I bought my own drink when we got to the bar. There wasn't a snowball's chance in hell that I was letting him hold a drink where I couldn't see it. Once seated, Michael wanted to see my driver's license, since he didn't really believe I was 19. I wasn't foolish enough to give him my license, though. Fuck that. He pulled out his, which I'm sure was a manipulation tactic to try and get me to do the same. I redirected the convo to see when his wife that he was waiting for would get there. He accidentally let it slip that he didn't have a wife. The gentle alarm bells had turned into a clanging chorus. I fully realized I was well and truly in an unsafe situation. I said I had to use the restroom, and while he was distracted, my plan was to slip out unseen. Like a complete dumbass, I didn't expect this overly attentive man to pick up on it, but he did pick up on what I was doing. He was trying to flag me down, and I used this opportunity to whip out my phone and walk myself out the door. By the time Michael caught up, I was on the phone with the taxi service, since I knew it would be unwise to go to the Windsor train platform where he could follow me, and there were significantly fewer people as well. Under the guise of keeping me safe, he followed me out and walked me down to the street. Then, I shit you not, Michael offered to get his car and give me a ride home. I was completely spooked at this point and began protesting much more firmly. I vehemently said how I didn't need him, the taxi was already coming, but he just pressed harder and harder. He told me I could call the family I lived with and be on the phone with them while he took me home, which, if I let him, I obviously realized that A, it would let him see where I lived, and B, if I got into his car, I would lose agency and control. He could easily overpower me. At my continued protests, he relented, but he wasn't done yet. He wrote down his number and told me to call him to hang out. The taxi finally pulled up at this point, effectively ending the conversation. I hopped in, told the taxi driver to go, and when I looked back, Michael was watching the entire time. Between the insistence to stay at my side, lying about the wife, trying to buy me drinks, wanting to see my license, and get me in a car to take me to where I lived, something was very wrong. Now in present day, I'm not prey to the be nice no matter what lie. With him, I had the feeling, the warning feeling, the one where you know whatever happens next will be bad news. I'm more cautious and assertive now. I plan on ingraining that mindset fully in future generations I have influence on. The lesson of don't be afraid to be a bad bitch if you get the feeling that something is unsafe and wrong. When I was a kid, I had a creepy encounter with a grown man. His half of this was much longer than mine. I think this is important to the story. I was a preteen when this happened, but I hit puberty early enough that I looked like a young teenager. We used to have a tiny barn on my property, and it was my job to milk our dairy goats every morning. So, every single morning at almost the exact same time, I'd be in the back corner of our lot to milk. It was in a fairly isolated area of our yard, and between 3 neighbors' fields and pastures, which was intentional since goats can be quite talkative. It was right beside our neighbor's chain-link fence/grapevines. I'd sing fairly loudly every morning since there was generally nobody to be bothered, and it calmed down the goats as well. This meant it was easy to know there was a girl back there every morning and night. This particular morning, my mom had a bad feeling and made my little brother go out with me this time. He was bored, so he messed around and collected eggs while I milked. There were little windows dotted all around the barn, including a wide one right behind me. The doors were wide open, so I figured he'd come back eventually. Well, I saw him walk past the doors and start talking to somebody. I figured it was the neighbor, so I didn't worry when he said, "Okay, I'll go get my mom then," and took off running. I heard the chain-link fence behind me rattle. I turned around, just in time to see a man launch himself over the chain-link fence and into the neighbor's yard. He had been watching me the entire time, waiting since before I got into the yard. I don't know what he would have done if my mom hadn't made my brother go with me that morning. I did get out of solo goat milking in the end though, so I guess that's a plus. This happened in my senior year of college, and I lived off campus at the time. I had 2 roommates in my apartment townhouse thing, named Natalie and Katie. Anyway, Katie was out that night doing homework in one of the old school buildings. I was suddenly awoken at 3 a.m. when I heard some knocking at the door downstairs. I thought that was weird considering the hour, but I figured somebody must have the wrong place and would quickly realize and then leave. The knocking didn't stop though, and I lied in bed for a good several minutes thinking, yeah, they'll go away now. They'll go away. They'll get bored. As one might expect though, I quickly started to grow confused. and then kind of freaked out by this person's persistence. Then the knocking turned into banging, and I could no longer ignore it. Honestly, I probably should have called the police instantly, but it was the middle of the night and I was just so confused. I headed to the top of the stairs to see Natalie standing near the door, just staring at it. Her room was on the bottom floor, so she had just walked up to it now. We exchanged a baffled look because, what the heck, it's 3 a.m., this is hella weird. Natalie called out and asked them who they were and what they wanted. "Oh, we're friends of Katie's," said a voice on the other end, who sounded male and about our age. We know her boyfriend and we heard she was feeling down, so we came to surprise her." This was already a weird cover story, because again, it was 3 in the morning. Thankfully, Katie wasn't even home, so we informed them of this. "Katie's not here, she's off doing something else." Good. This meant they were going to leave, right? They came here to see Katie after all, and she's not here, so they'll leave us alone and we can go back to sleep. Just open the door. I know. If I hadn't called the police before, I definitely should have done it now. It was weird though. That night I realized why people do stupid things in horror films. Not only had I been woken up out of nowhere, but it felt so surreal to be in a situation like this. Almost like there's no way you could actually be in danger. I mean, that only happens in horror movies, true crime documentaries, questionable creepy stories online. It would never happen to me. I'm just an ordinary, random, boring person going about my business. There's that thought of, I don't need to call the police. I'm sure this will get cleared up and everything will be fine. So, Natalie and I did the stupid thing and tried to argue with them. We told them that again, Katie wasn't here, so there was no need for them to stay. Eventually, Natalie asked what their names were. Throughout the encounter, we had made out 2 distinct voices, but only one gave us a name. I texted Katie without telling him, asking if she was friends with someone with that name. After a couple minutes, during which we were still arguing with these strangers, Katie replied, "I am, but I don't think she knows where I live." That wasn't good, but even worse, she? The person on the other side of the door clearly had a male voice, so this was a real name, but not a real person. Whoever this was knew stuff about Katie, like who she hung out with and that. I told Katie to stay where she was and not come back until we told her everything was okay. Finally, we told the guys that if they didn't leave, we were going to call the police. No, don't call the police. Don't call the police, okay? If we wanted to do something bad, we would have already done it, right? Yeah, that last bit wasn't exactly helping their case. Just open the door, okay? The attempts at reasoning with them basically devolved into them telling us to just open the door over and over again, until we finally did actually call the police. We hid in Natalie's room and dialed 911 and explained what was going on. Thankfully, there was a police station quite close by, so it wouldn't take long for them to arrive. Unfortunately, I made the mistake of heading back into the living room and yelling through the door that we'd called the cops. But contrary to what you might think, that actually didn't seem to scare them at all. In fact, it seemed to only mildly upset them, and they kept trying to get in. To this day, I can only assume they just didn't believe us or something. We heard the neighbor's door open, and a very pissed-off man's voice calling out, "If you don't leave right now, I'm calling the police." For whatever reason, that was what caused them to freak out, and they drove off. The police arrived, and we told them the whole story. Natalie revealed that a couple of times she had just barely peeked through the blinds of a window close to the front door, and she noted that there were 2 guys, but only one of them was ever at the door at any given time. They would switch, with one at the door and the other sitting in the driver's seat of a car parked just out front, presumably for getaway purposes. So, yeah, that's reassuring. They also hadn't looked drunk, according to Natalie, and definitely hadn't sounded like they were either. There wasn't exactly much the police could do besides sweep the area a bit, but they told us that if the strangers showed up again, to immediately call instead of engaging with them at all. One of the officers also gave us some self-defense tactics and told us what kinds of household items and chemicals would work best for a situation like this in the future. After making sure everything was okay and reassuring us, they left, and we eventually called Katie and told her the weirdos were gone. She arrived and was quite understandably a bit shaken herself. We sat down and tried to talk her through who might have known where she lived. She did know people who had come to the apartment, so some people certainly, but Natalie didn't recognize the guys outside as any previous visitors. Worse, it turned out that not only did they know Katie's friend's name, but they also claimed to know her boyfriend and his name, even though he didn't even live in the same state we were going to school. She swore up and down she didn't know anyone who would want to hurt her. By this point, it was around 5 a.m., so I didn't even bother trying to go to sleep, since I was going to a workshop that morning. I told a lot of my classmates the story, and it freaked them out too. The entire day, Natalie and I jumped at every unexpected noise, every shadow, every random movement. That night, it was hard to sleep. I expected to hear them knocking at the door at any second. Thankfully, though, they never came back. Ever. But that almost makes things more unsettling in a way. I'll never, ever know what they wanted that night. Did they think we were hiding Katie from them? Was she seeing some less than savory people in secret? Did they want to hurt her? If they did, why did they never give up and go looking for her elsewhere? Was all of that just an excuse to get into the apartment of a young woman? Did they want to kidnap us, hurt us, rob us? Who knows? I try not to let it bother me, but I wish I knew if my life was in danger that night. I have a feeling it might have been. After all, they weren't wearing any face coverings, so if they wanted to commit a violent crime, they might want to get rid of the witnesses. But despite how much I wish I knew, I guess I'll never know. Okay, so this is going to sound bizarre and made up, but I swear on my left nipple that this really happened. There are several witnesses as well. Even if I can't explain why someone would do this, I'm fairly positive this is not anything paranormal. I live quite a distance off the road in an unremarkable house on private property. My neighbors are all older family members who go to bed extremely early, and whose children have already grown and moved out of the house. In summary, there are no mischief makers to play pranks on us around here. A few months ago, my mother and I stayed up late one evening, watching television together. At around 3 a.m., I turned the television off and decided it was about time to go to bed. As I was leaving the room, though, I began to hear what sounded like carnival music playing outside my house in the front yard. It was loud and very close. My mother heard it too. We immediately went to the window to investigate. She peeked outside, but she couldn't see anything but pure darkness. Everyone else was either already asleep for the night or away on vacation. The lights were off in all of their houses, and none of them would be caught dead listening to anything but country music anyway. We were miles from the nearest city, so it couldn't possibly be the product of noise pollution. You can hear when a car has just pulled up into the yard, but there was no sound of a car either. The silence where we live is usually deafening. All you can hear is the ringing in your own ears. So where did this song come from? Who was playing it? And why? I was very unsettled by the idea of a stranger in our backyard playing carnival music. I guess to me it suggested malicious intent. My father and uncle later mentioned that 20 years ago, when my parents first moved in, the electrician had come to install a ceiling light and stopped in the middle of his work, saying he could hear Pink Floyd playing in the front yard. Neither my father nor my uncle had heard this. My father has a bit of a hearing problem, and my uncle is also a much older man as well. They kinda laughed it off and thought the man was insane, but it really freaked the electrician out. He kept opening the door and trying to find the source of the noise to no avail. Then it hit me. The song I heard that night was Pink Floyd's Cirrus Minor. the part that sounds like Carnival music. I played the song for my mother, and she began freaking out, saying, Yeah, that's what I heard." Who the hell would sit in my yard at night at 3 a.m. in the middle of nowhere, playing that same song which isn't even that popular, 20 years later with no car? Where did they come from? They would have had to walk several miles to get here. Aside from this, the only other strange thing we experienced that would suggest there was an intruder would be that we feel and hear knocking on the living room window late at night sometimes, around the same hour. Sometimes it's so intense that the entire wall of the house is rattled, and it sends the couch against it into a reclining position. There are no nearby trees to tap the glass, and no animal except a human could possibly reach it. Fortunately, this has stopped over the last few weeks. In 2007-ish, I was about 13 years old. My brother, my cousin, and her boyfriend thought it would be fun to walk around an abandoned mental hospital for children in the afternoon. It had been abandoned within just a few years due to the discovery that spores were causing cancer in the patients. The area was huge, acres and acres of land. That's because the hospital itself was not just one building. There were multiple buildings, marked A, B, C, etc., all arranged in a circle. Each building housed children with a specific illness or disorder category. The middle of said circle was a rusted-out playground, the perfect setting for a horror film. We shortly arrived and parked in front of Building C. As we were walking, every single time I was near one of the buildings, I would hear this children's laughter. It was echoed, but sounded almost like it was right next to me. Very odd. My cousin tried opening a door to Building B, but we found that it was locked shut. A couple of seconds later, though, there was a loud bang coming from the other side of the door. My brother, being my brother, always said, "It's just kids partying in there," as his reasoning for pretty much anything abnormal ever happening. My cousin then screamed and pointed up at a window, claiming she had seen a girl with a patient's gown on. I got too freaked out and asked if I could go back to the car. My cousin's boyfriend escorted me and the rest of them decided to continue exploring. Once I got to the car, I started to hear laughter again. I blasted the radio to try and tune it out, but the laughter got louder and louder, almost as if they were mocking me. I decided to put my hands over my ears and put my head between my legs, and yet the laughter never diminished even slightly. When they all came back, my cousin said she heard loud laughter and a gurgling sound so frequently that she made everyone else come back with her to the car. My brother, still being my brother, continued his claim of kids being in the buildings and screwing around. Fast forward to the evening. I was sleeping facing the wall. I woke up with my right side being quite sore. I decided to turn over onto my left side and face the room. When I opened my eyes, I saw a girl with a white gown on, standing over me. Immediate shock shrouded over me, not being able to quickly break eye contact with her. I eventually blinked though, and when I opened my eyes, she had disappeared. I ended up running to my parents' room and sleeping there for the rest of the night. So, for clarification, this was back in 2014, during the summer after The Purge came out, which will be relevant information later. My dad, little brother, 11, neighbor, 11, and I, 15, were staying at a cabin for a week during our summer break to go fishing. On our third night of staying there, around 11 p.m., some guy came up and knocked on our door, asking if we would help jump his car. Apparently, the battery had just died while he was driving by. My dad agreed to help him, but told us to call the cops if he wasn't back in 20 minutes. Our cabin was in the middle of the wood, you see, and he would have had no reason to even be that far down that road unless he was intentionally on his way to visit our cabin. 30 minutes passed by before my dad finally came back. He told us the man had been asking a bunch of weird questions, how many of us were staying, those sorts of things. When he did jumpstart his car though, the guy immediately left. 2 nights later, my brother, neighbor, and I were up late watching TV in the living room. At some point around 1 a.m., a different man showed up at our cabin, wearing the resort's logo and uniform, with the official resort car as well. But he didn't knock or anything. He just stared into our cabin, standing on the porch. We had no idea how long he was standing there, but at some point my neighbor noticed him staring in at us, and jumped up and ran over to the bedroom to wake up my dad. My dad, obviously annoyed at this point, walked up to the door while not opening it, and asked the guy what he was doing there. The man said he'd gotten a call from the reception desk that our TV was not working, and he was there to fix it. Meanwhile, our TV was obviously working since he'd seen us watching TV on it for who knows how long. Anyway, my dad told him we didn't need anything, and he should leave right now. The guy then proceeded to say we were out of toilet paper, and he needed to refill it for us. Again, my dad said we didn't need any, and the man should just leave. He continued to get ruder and ruder though, asking about towels, our phones, any other thing he could possibly refill or fix. Eventually though, he gave up and left. The next morning, we called the reception desk to report this because this guy was obviously out of line. They tell us they don't send out anyone that late anymore for services for the cabins, and it must have been a mistake. They asked us to describe the man. About 55 years old, tall, light blonde, grayish hair, blue eyes. Well, when we do, they tell us that nobody with that description even works there. At this point, we were all extremely freaked out, and trying to figure out who the hell he was and why he was there. Turns out that apparently that same weekend there had been hundreds of people across the country attempting to recreate a real-life purge. We don't know for sure if that's what his intentions were, but I'm assuming the first guy, the one with the car problem asking weird questions, was there to scope out our situation possibly, and when he saw it was just one adult with 3 kids, he relayed it to his partner, the second guy, that we'd be a good cabin to rob, hurt, etc. I'm just happy my dad never unlocked our door for the fake resort guy, cause who knows why he went through all that effort to pretend to work there. This is my first ever post on Reddit, but I thought this would be a perfect place to share. This happened over 10 years ago, but still creeps me out to this day. Quick backstory. My parents are divorced, and at this time I lived full-time with my dad. I had just left my mom's house because I was saying goodbye to my dog that we were putting down that day. I was a complete mess and so sad. My dad is in a bowling league and has been forever, so I was returning home to an empty home. I pulled into my driveway and saw the landscapers were there. However, there were way more than usual, just standing around. They were standing in the driveway and did not even fully move as I was pulling in. They proceeded to try and get my attention while I was just trying to pull into my garage. I ignored them and almost backed out of the driveway and went somewhere else. I just immediately got a bad and uncomfortable feeling about this entire situation. I got inside my house and immediately burst into a fit of crying. I mean, I was a teenager and I was extremely sad my dog was being put down. I could hear the men talking outside. I went upstairs when I heard the doorbell ring over and over, and then the knocking at the door. I locked myself in my bathroom as the knocking and ringing of the doorbell continued. They kept yelling, "We know you're home!" It went on for what felt like forever, but probably lasted around 20 to 25 minutes. I remember calling my dad as well, but he didn't answer because he was busy. I convinced myself they had a concern or a question or something, but if that was the case, then they could easily reach out to my dad when he got home, leave a note or give him a call later or something. Instead, they harassed me, a teenage girl, when they knew I was home alone. I began to wonder if they were even real landscapers at all. There were so many of them, just standing around in the driveway not even doing anything. We have a small yard, and I've only ever seen maybe 1 or 2 guys doing our landscaping before. It was so creepy, and eventually after a while they just left. It started out a bad day, and it turned out even worse. This happened last month. I like to smoke in the evenings, but I was having a very bad day. So at 4 p.m., I decided no one was likely to bother me anyway for the rest of the day. I decided to go smoke early. I know this could have made me extra paranoid for this encounter, but even with a sober mind, what happened still creeps me out. So there I am, freshly high and sitting in my living room, when suddenly someone knocks at my door. I ignore it because I'm high as fuck, and also half naked, wearing only a loose house dress because I'm one of those at-home nudity type people. After several minutes though, the person is still knocking. I'm concerned that it's my upstairs neighbor, and she knows I'm home. I trust her, and I know she'd laugh it off if I was half naked, so I finally got up and went to answer the door. I got to the hallway in front of the door, and I could immediately tell it was not her. I had never seen this person before in my life, but he kinda looked like a catalog model. Very conventionally attractive people kinda freak me out sometimes, and I'd never seen someone before in person who looked so model-like. I immediately wanted to nope out of the situation, but he saw me through the window on my door, and I felt trapped. The dude had already been knocking on my door for several minutes at this point, you know. I opened the door just a crack to see who he is and what he wanted. This is a mostly safe town, and it was only 4 p.m. I didn't want him to notice that I was high or half naked, though. He claimed to be a representative from a local cable company, and had all of the costume to confirm it. Said he wanted to talk to me about getting cable. I had just moved into this apartment, and I realized he must have been assigned to recruit me. I didn't want cable/internet. I decided to go cable-free, and I was sharing the internet and the associated bill with my neighbors. Before I really got a chance to assess the situation, though, I accidentally expressed my concern that I was afraid my cat would slip out of the house. Well, next thing I know, he's standing in my apartment with me, in this tiny hallway, with the door closed. Now he was in my house, and I couldn't hide myself anymore. I just wanted him to leave. Now, I can't really explain it or justify it, but I have a really hard time being straightforward with people I don't know well. I wasn't concerned for my safety or anything at this point, because we'd only been talking a few minutes. I just knew I wanted him to leave, and I wasn't interested in his services. I was also afraid to tell him I was sharing the internet. It was the same company he was representing, because technically my neighbors and I are 2 different households, and I wasn't sure if they would get in trouble because that wasn't within company policy. The first excuse I tried to get him to leave was, "I already have your cable services at my last apartment. I'm actually transferring it over this week." Apparently that excuse wasn't good enough. Then I tried, "I'm not sure if I want cable. I might just go with the internet, and I'm thinking about using a different company." That didn't fly either. I told him I needed time to think about it, that I wanted to evaluate my options. I asked if he could come back another day. At this point, he's been there a long time. He never lost his big smile, but he started to get more and more irate with me. His smile stayed the same, but his tone started to get frustrated as he repeatedly explained the same deals to me over and over. His face started to do this thing. I don't know how to explain it other than a flicker where his whole face just changed expressions and then quickly changed back to a big smile. He appeared to be getting desperate to get my sale. He explained to me that it's so inconvenient for him to have to come back and I need to make up my mind right now. I told him no a few times leading up to this point, but he wouldn't take it for an answer. If I were sober, I would have point blank told him to leave. But, of course, at this point I was not sober. Finally, though, I got to a point where even that couldn't stop me. I told him point blank, "Look, I'm really uncomfortable, I'm half naked, I'm also really high, and I don't make decisions like this while I'm high." He apparently thought that was really funny. He started trying to sell to me even harder. He said something along the lines of, "I know you're high." So, with my last excuse gone, I finally agreed to sign up for a setup date. I didn't have to give any money. I just had to give my email address and the date I wanted his installation guy to show up. I asked if the guy could show up 3 weeks from now, to give me plenty of time to cancel. He initially agreed, but instead signed up to have the guy show up 5 days later. He told me that if I wanted to cancel, all I have to do is call him, specifically. He also says if I want, I can just not answer the door when the installation guy shows up. He followed this up by saying one last thing. "Of course, if you cancel or don't let the guy in, I'll have to come back to make sure everything's okay myself and find out what's going on." He tells me it'll take 5 minutes to sign me up or whatever the installation process and asks to come into my living room to sit down. I tell him no and he goes to his car to finish the application. It took him 20 minutes. While he was gone, I walked around my apartment, only to see that he'd been talking to me for 40 minutes. He came back and told me the farthest installation date he could choose was only 5 days away. His smile came back 100%. No longer frustrated, face wasn't flickering. He left immediately. The very next day, I called the cable company to cancel the services with my last apartment, but also to ask about this guy. I tell him how persistent the man was and how he made me so uncomfortable. They tell me they heard the salespeople can be very aggressive and offered to put it in my file for him to never come back to my place. I agreed immediately and stressed that I really never wanted him to come back. The woman I was talking to offered to email her supervisor about the issue as well, to really cement he wouldn't be coming back. I agreed to that. The woman was an understanding angel. Anyway, 2 weeks later, I open up the door and that guy is there. He had a smile on his face, but I could tell he was very angry. "So, what's going on?" he asks. "I thought we had everything figured out." He started to question me. I was stunned. Not only was he back, but we had literally spent 40 minutes of him trying to talk me into a service I clearly didn't want. Now he was at my doorstep trying to figure out why I'd canceled. "I thought you wanted this." I told him firmly I changed my mind and he needed to leave. "Well, is it worth my time to come back again?" I said no, and he turned around and quickly walked off without saying anything else. People keep telling me I should report the fact he came back when he wasn't supposed to, but I'm concerned because he already knows where I live. I'm also concerned because IMO, when someone says I'm too impaired to make this decision, I think a salesman should be obligated to back off. I'm mostly concerned though because there was no indication I was home when he first came over. There were no vehicles, lights, or noise to imply I was home. He wouldn't have been able to see me in the living room either from my door, but he continued to knock for like 20 minutes, like he was confident I was just slow getting to the door. I know I'm paranoid, but I actually wonder if he peeked through my windows before coming to see if I was actually home. Maybe I should report him? I'm in my early 20s and female. I posted here a few days ago and you guys seem to really enjoy my creepy encounter, so here's another. Like I said in my last post, I moved here a couple of years ago on my own. About 9 months after I had moved in, someone started pounding at my door a little bit past 11:30 p.m. I was already in bed by this point, and I was awfully concerned about this person at my door. My upstairs neighbor's aquarium had broken the night before, and it was flooding into my living room. Since I had just had a fiasco with my neighbor late at night, I figured it was probably just her again, and almost opened the door without hesitation. Right before I opened it up, though, I had this horrid feeling wash over me. Instead, I meekly whispered, "Hello?" through the door. Immediately, I heard a man reply, "Hi, I'm a friend of David Jones." The second I heard him speak, my blood went cold. I had a very terrible feeling about this. David Jones was the name of the previous tenant. He was very elderly and disabled. He was in a wheelchair and lived with a helper, and he passed away before I moved in. I looked out the peephole to see a man wearing sunglasses at almost midnight, a black face mask, and a black hoodie with the hood all the way up. David doesn't live here anymore. I'm sorry." He pounded his fist on my door and laughed. "Oh yeah? Open the door and prove it." Like I said, David was in a wheelchair and needed a ramp for the door, which was removed before I ever even moved in. I also drive a motorcycle, and my immediate neighbors don't drive any particularly wheelchair-accessible vehicles. With all this in mind, you would think someone who felt comfortable enough with David to be knocking on his door in the middle of the night after at least almost a year of no communication would be able to evaluate the situation and see there were no wheelchair modifications. Well, this wasn't the case. He began pounding at the door, telling me to open up immediately. I told him David was not here. I was not opening the door, and he needed to leave right now. He stood outside my place for a few more minutes. I was scared, standing frozen by my door. I saw him begin to walk away. I was still by my door when I heard someone rustling around my back door, over by where my bedroom is. I was still frozen. I didn't want to believe that someone could actually be by my bedroom window. For clarification, the area by my window is attached to a common area yard for all the residents. It's directly off the sidewalk of a relatively busy area, so it isn't uncommon to have someone in the yard, but it's certainly uncommon to have someone directly up against your porch and windows. I heard something loud in my bedroom. I grabbed my pepper spray and cautiously approached the room. It appeared no one had broken in, but something seemed really off. After a while, I hadn't seen this person anywhere, and I went back to bed. In the morning, I came out for a smoke and saw my bedroom window screen had been torn off. It was bent all out of shape. Definitely didn't look like it just randomly fell off. I knew exactly what had happened. That guy had ripped off the screen and tried to get in through my bedroom window. Thankfully, it was locked up and I have window jammers as well. This obviously frightened me though, but there wasn't much I could do at this point. A few weeks later, someone tried to open my front door in the middle of the day. No knocks, no nothing. I just heard my door clearly tried to be opened. I shot up and ran to the peephole to see that same man dressed in all black, hood up with his black sunglasses on. He tried the door a couple of more times and pushed against it really hard. I was trying to think of something intimidating to say or something I could say to get him to stop. My brain decided it was a great idea to just hit the door. It worked though, so hey. I slapped the back of the door really hard. The guy jumped about 3 feet in the air and ran away. Now here's where I think it gets really bizarre. So I googled my address. Everything online for my current residence still lists David Jones as the active resident. I 100% think that guy saw me, a young female all alone, and googled my address, trying to get my trust into opening the door. I think after that didn't work, he was still trying to get in, hence the bedroom window. Him coming back a few weeks later, though, is very weird in my opinion. You'd think he would either move on to another target or be much more interested in trying again sooner. I think he definitely did not know David. I don't think he owed him money or was family or any of that. The timeline is just so bizarre. Maybe he's already had other victims and just decided to try my place. At any rate, though, his plan didn't work and he was now gone. Literally months go by at this point. Someone gently knocks at my door at around 9 p.m. I go up to look, and what do you know? An individual covered in black head to toe, with the sunglasses covering his eyes. I didn't answer or make any noise. He slowly turned the door handle and pushed the door, then took a few steps back and walked to my neighbor's door. I heard him then try theirs. My neighbor was a middle-aged man living alone. When that door didn't open, I saw him walk up the stairs and could hear him trying them one by one. This apartment had 5 people living in it, including a child. That door didn't open. He tried the remaining door, that currently didn't have anyone living in it. Failed again. That was creepy as hell. Okay, so that made me think that maybe he didn't single me out as a vulnerable female, because he seemed to just be trying to get into anywhere he could. I do think it was rather strange that my cat seemed to hate him as well. I've never seen either of them hiss until this guy was at my door. They were always clearly very frightened and ready to fight, which is majorly unlike either of them. You honestly wouldn't even know they have teeth or claws unless you're a cardboard box or a laser pointer. Fast forward to early January. Our clad in black lad is back. My brother, who looks quite intimidating, happened to be over for a visit. He heard someone try to open my door. He got up, opened the door, to see this guy actively trying to force open my middle-aged neighbor's door. The guy sprinted for his life. My brother wasn't aware this was an ongoing issue, and where he thought it was weird, he wasn't trying to run after this guy either. Today, I was taking a nap, and around 2 p.m. I hear this aggressive knock at my door. It pauses for a few moments, then picks back up. While this is happening, I heard my upstairs neighbors quickly close their windows. I was tired, and figured it was the same creep, so I didn't even bother looking. After a few minutes, I heard him knocking on my neighbor's door. After that failed, he went upstairs and knocked on the 2 doors up there for a bit. After a while, the knocking stopped, and I heard my upstairs neighbors open their windows back up. I couldn't sleep anymore, so I grabbed my smokes and headed outside. I could hear my neighbors through their open window. Their little girl was asking her mom who that man is, and why he kept doing this. I know of him bothering them at least twice, but it could definitely be more as well. I've reported all this to my landlord. She's absolutely no help though, and basically just tells me not to answer the door if I feel unsafe and call the police if it escalates. The police don't have a quick enough response time to come out here when it's happening. I did call them before, but I don't have much of a description for them to go off of. They basically just told me the same thing as my landlord. You would think someone ripping my bedroom screen off would count as escalating, but I guess not. This guy has been bothering me for a little over a year now, and apparently all of my neighbors as well. It seems really weird for a criminal to do, right? Just keep trying to break into the same group of apartments over and over again, at all hours of the day and night. I guess I just have no idea what he's really after. For anyone who saw my last post that might be wondering if this is the same neighbor that tried to drug me, I suppose it's possible, but I don't think he has the same build. The peephole does give some type of distortion, so I guess it could be that. I really could be, I'm just not sure. I think it's highly unlikely though. This stranger is harassing my neighbors and I consistently, and none of us even know what he looks like. Don't open your doors to strangers, folks. No matter what time of day it is. My neighbor is one of those annoying wannabe YouTube personalities. Over the years, I've seen him cough out cinnamon, lay flat on the hood of his car as it slowly creeps down the driveway, and douse himself in lukewarm water. All the while screaming, epic win, epic fail, epic maintenance of the status quo for all I know. It can get tiring to watch him go about his shenanigans in the pursuit of viral fame. So when he knocked on my door the other day and told me he was going to be away for a few weeks and asked that I get his mail, honestly it was quite a relief. I can't explain the peace of mind I had knowing I wouldn't have to brace myself for any of his stupidity for a while. I was always afraid his stunts would wind up bleeding over into my life. Things were pretty normal for the first couple of days. He received a few bills, a bit of spam, what I could only assume was a birthday card as well. Then one evening, I got home to find a cardboard box waiting on his front porch. In big red letters was written, "Return to sender." I'm no small fry, but I admit I had trouble lifting the box on my own. It was really freaking heavy, Lugging it across the road to my house was even harder. I quickly realized there was no way I was going to drag it up the stairs and through my front door. I decided I'd leave his package in my garage. It wasn't like I kept my car in there. The garage door was a piece of shit that refused to open without a good thug and a whack. It was less trouble just leaving the car in the driveway than it was to fight with the garage door every morning and night. In hindsight, I should have set the package down while I struggled to open the tricky door. But you know how it is when you've got a good grip on something. No point setting it down if you don't have to. It was as I kicked the door for a third time that I lost my grip on the package, and it fell to the ground. I heard a light crack inside. Ah, shit, I cursed. I hoped I hadn't broken anything important, but I figured I just wouldn't tell my neighbor about it, and let him assume the break happened en route. Hands free, I finally managed to get the garage door unstuck, and boy did it screech in protest as it rolled up and over me. I dragged the box the rest of the way, setting it in the corner for whenever my neighbor would come back to claim it. And then, I forgot all about it. Until a few days passed, that is. I'm not sure exactly how long it took for the smell to waft in from the crack under the garage-to-house door, but it came in at a slow progression. It was a sickly sweet odor similar to a skunk, and for the first few days after I smelled it, I genuinely assumed that's what it was. Roadkill that had left its mark on my house or something. It was only when I realized the scent was growing more intense instead of fading that I went to look for a source. That's when I opened the garage door, and that's when the odor knocked me back, holding my nose. The culprit wasn't hard to identify. The only change in my garage was that box in the corner. I remember thinking it must have been one of those meat-of-the-month subscription boxes. The meat must have gone rancid from being left out of the fridge for so long. How much meat could have been in there, though, for the box to have been so large and heavy? An entire freaking cow? I covered my nose as I approached that box, a pair of scissors in my hand. I probably wouldn't have needed them to open it, though, as it had become soggy enough at the bottom to poke through with a finger. I wasn't about to poke my finger into spoiled meat juices, though. That soggy bottom was the reason I had to open the box in the first place. If I tried to drag it out whole, everything would spill onto the floor. I was going to have to dump the pieces in one garbage bag at a time and take them down to the dumpster, a process I was not looking forward to. My scissors tore through the tape along the top of the box. I thought the smell couldn't possibly get any worse, but as I flipped those flaps open, I discovered a whole new gamut of stink. It was like opening a burning oven, but instead of a heat wave, I was met with waves of piss, sweat, shit, and putrefaction. It was so bad, I staggered back and had to force down the puke begging to guzzle out of me. I don't think I could have handled that scent mingling with the horrors coming out of the box. I'm not ashamed to admit I ran out the door for a breath of fresh air, but in the short time I'd spent in the garage, the smell had become so ingrained in the very fabric of my clothes, it clung to me like a shadow. Nothing I tried could keep that horrid smell out of my nostrils. Not air fresheners, not a face mask, not 3 showers and a change of clothes. Every second that box lay open in my garage was another second the smell was allowed a foothold into my home. I had to bite the bullet. I returned to the garage, the flaps of the box still open as though inviting me to look. I was prepared. A clothespin pinning my nostrils shut, a garbage bag in one hand, the strongest cleaner I could find in the other, and long rubber gloves to keep my skin from having to touch what was inside. But as it turns out, I needed none of those things. I wouldn't have to touch or clean the contents of the box. I would only have to suffer the nightmares every night. You see, there was meat in that box, but it didn't come from a cow or a pig. No, it was worse than that. It was my neighbor, dead. Still in one piece, but dead. I called the cops, and naturally they took me in for interrogation. Kinda hard to not suspect the man with a corpse in his garage, after all. Thankfully, though, they soon realized I was not involved. My DNA might have been all over that box, the smell might have left a mark throughout my house, but there was one piece of irrefutable evidence in my neighbor's own hands that proved my innocence. A vlogging camera. They showed me the footage only once, I'm not sure if they were allowed to, or if they felt so bad for me they figured it couldn't hurt. Either way, though, I saw it. My neighbor was sitting in the box outside of a shipping facility, laughing as he told the world how he was going to mail himself across state lines. He'd brought pee bottles, food, a pillow, a few flashlights. His friend, a guy I'd seen at his place several times to help with his stunts, closed the lid and presumably dropped him off for shipment. Throughout the next couple of hours or days, I'm honestly not sure, my neighbor recorded a few clips about his progress. I think I'm in a truck now. I can feel it moving. Must be in a warehouse. Pretty warm here. Still got plenty of food, though. That kind of stuff. Then, on the last entry, the box toppled over. He broke his neck, and that was it. The camera recorded until either the memory card got too full or the battery died. There's one thing I didn't tell the police after they showed me the video. One thing I heard in the footage that will haunt me to the day I die. Just after the tumble that broke his neck, I heard the familiar screeching sound of my garage door. My fiancé and I threw a dinner party one time to celebrate his mom completing chemo. I hired a caterer. We were expecting 25 friends and family, so it was more than the kitchenette of our single-story ranch house could handle. We'd also only just moved in, so we didn't really have a lot of cooking staples. The caterer said he'd bring everything 75% done, but he needed to finish off some dishes in our kitchen. I told him that was fine as long as he was finished before 5, because the kitchen is centrally located, and we prefer everyone to be finished before the guests arrived, due to the intimate nature of the occasion. The man said that would be fine. He arrives as scheduled at 12 p.m. We gave him until 5, and the guests aren't even arriving until around 6, so it's plenty of time. He smelled like actual dog shit, but his accent sounded European, so I thought maybe he just didn't believe in deodorant or something. It was more than a sweat smell, though. It smelled like a sun-baked diaper, and that made me uneasy. He was going to be preparing food for those who were sick prior, and for young kids. I just made sure he washed his hands, and then left him to his own devices, worrying I was just being presumptuous. Throughout the entire process, he kept pulling me aside to ask me questions and have me taste things. I was super busy because my husband had to work during the day, and pick up the surprise guest right after. So setting up the deck, decorating, and putting together the slideshow equipment, coordinating the surprise guest, and everything else was my job. Just a million other little details. Being asked every 10 minutes things like, "Do you prefer this with paprika or without?" was getting old. When he was still there at 5:45, after 2 gentle reminders, I flat out told him I needed him completely out by 6 no matter what. He apologized profusely, and said there had been a delay because our oven wouldn't stay up to temperature. I'd never had a problem before, but I figured since he's the professional, maybe it was a subtle one. A little before 6 rolls around, a few of our friends start trickling in. I decided to tell him whatever's done is done, and whatever isn't he should just put in the fridge. But suddenly he's nowhere to be found. I go out on the deck to ask my friends if they'd seen him, and he's out there, alcoholic beverage in hand, out of his chef whites and now in tee and jeans, mingling with my friends. I walked out just in time for him to introduce himself to my cousin-in-law as a good friend of mine. No, too weird for me. I met him in person for the first time barely 6 hours ago. I told him he needed to leave, now. He goes inside and gets his bag, and makes a beeline for my bedroom. I'm taken aback. "Excuse me? Where are you going?" "Oh, to change." First of all, we have a guest bathroom clearly visible. Second, why can't he just wear a t-shirt and jeans at home? I tell him I'm not comfortable with him going to my room, but he insists it'll only be a second. He goes in and shuts and locks the door. I couldn't even get a word out before he went in and felt helpless. I was going to go outside to ask one of my friends to help me usher him out, but at that point my fiancé got there with my aunt-in-law. I had to explain the situation to him, nearly in tears at that point. He pounded on the door, and the caterer came out still in the same outfit. My fiancé said, "You shouldn't be in there. You need to leave." The caterer said, "Excuse me, but this is not your house. It's not up to you to decide." My 6'4", 260-pound fiancé tells him that it actually, yes, was his house. He puts his hand on the man's back and guides him to the door. The caterer then says that he thought I lived here. My fiancé responds that I lived there with him, and the caterer goes nuts. He turns to me and screams, "You lied to me, you bitch!" I have no clue what he's talking about. He starts yelling about how I led him on, and calling me all sorts of names. I don't know who he thought the man in the pictures with me around the house was. My fiancé says, "You won't talk that way in my house. Go find the door." The caterer goes into the kitchen and starts throwing the trays of food out of the refrigerator and onto the floor. At that point, my fiancé realized two of his brothers, both currently offensive linemen at the college level, had come in and were on the deck. He signaled to them and they all came inside and basically said, "This guy is harassing me." Since they're a family of all boys and my fiancé is the first to get married, they don't get to flex their protective muscles too often, and jumped at the chance to toss this guy out. The party then went on as planned, but I insisted we just order pizza and throw out all the food he had made. My fiancé and friends kept asking me if that wasn't a bit too much, but I was insistent. We went out late drinking with his brothers and got home at around 3:30 a.m. and passed out in our room. At around 5 a.m., I was woken up to the sound of the door opening. I figured either we forgot to lock the door in our drunken stupor and it blew open, or one of his family forgot their keys or something in the house and didn't want to wake us up. His parents never ever let themselves in when they know we're home, and his brothers had had even more than we did, and were definitely not awake and driving at around 5 a.m. It wasn't nearly windy enough for the door to have been blown open, as it had been a tranquil night. I wake up my fiancé and whisper, "Someone just came into the house." He said the same thing. Probably my brother just left his wallet or something. I figured I was being paranoid and tried to put it to rest, when I hear a loud crashing sound. With that, my fiancé was up and on his feet in one movement. He told me to lock myself in the closet and call 911, while he went and looked around. As I was pulling out my phone, we hear in that distinct European accent, "Hello?" I realized it was the insane caterer. Now, I was not worried about this caterer physically overpowering my husband, or me for that matter, so I charged right out there. He was shirtless and clearly on something. He's taking the pictures that are just of me off the wall, and holding several in his arms already. He lunges straight towards me when he sees me, and my fiancé gets between me and him and I call 911. My fiancé tells him the cops have been called, and it's in his best interest to immediately leave. The caterer just starts going on about how he has to make sure I'm okay. I start to ask him why I wouldn't be, but my fiancé rightfully says not to engage with a crazy person and feed into it. My fiancé stays between me and him while I climb out a window. He watches as the caterer throws photos of us all over the floor. My fiancé didn't want to subdue or touch him in any way, so the caterer couldn't make any assault claims. He'd begun to destroy our kitchen at this point, when the cops finally came in. He had a butcher knife. My fiancé considered going for the gun safe when he first got the knife, since we live in a stand your ground state, but he decided the situation was hectic enough without introducing a new firearm. The caterer didn't obey the police's orders to drop his weapon, and just kept saying that he isn't leaving without me, so they tased him. It was lucky for him he only got tased, and didn't antagonize my husband into squishing him. As he's let out in cuffs, he keeps shouting about how he and I are in love, and it figures I chose a macho thug over a sweet, sensitive artist like him. All women's are whores, etc. He continues on this tirade the entire time the police are reading him his rights. The police ask us to do an inventory of the house and see if anything's missing or damaged, besides what we'd witnessed him do. We go around and there's nothing, but then I remember that he was in our room yesterday and go through the room. All my panties from the dirty laundry hamper were gone, and my vibrator had been moved from where I keep it. We were so freaked out in the aftermath that we replaced all our kitchenware, toothbrushes, and sent our sheets to be professionally cleaned. We had a cleaning crew do a deep clean of the entire house. I'm so glad we decided not to serve the food to our guests. He sent me a letter from prison that thankfully my husband intercepted, because I was still recovering from the whole thing. We gave it directly to the police, who helped us get issued a no-contact order. He was sentenced to 3 years in prison 5 years ago, so he's out by now, but thankfully we never met again. This encounter happened in the summer of 2006, when I was just 20 years old. I didn't get my driver's license until January of that year, and driving opened up so many doors for me that I took a lot of solo road trips to my friends' houses in the New England and Mid-Atlantic states. I also looked pretty young for my age, and was often mistaken for a high school student in my early 20s. I was driving alone on I-78 on a random July day, on my way to visit my friend in southern Pennsylvania for a long weekend. Her parents were away, and we had the house to ourselves. We were planning on drinking or hot tubbing and watching Planet Earth drunk. It had just come out at the time. Maybe to run around some cornfields at night. I was so excited and had a great drive, listening to good music, and it was just a beautiful overall day. Right after I crossed the border from New Jersey into Pennsylvania, I stopped at one of the first rest stops to get gas and snacks for the last part of my drive. I've since tried to figure out which rest stop this was, but I can't ID it. It was just a gas station with a large mini-mart. Opposite the gas station was the on-ramp back to I-78 West, and parallel to the on-ramp was a dirt road, which comes into play later. I was heading into the store when a man in his late 30s to early 40s approached me. He was a very stocky guy, decently tall, had on a plain black tee and jeans with dark brown hair and a mustache. He had come out of a black pickup truck parked a few spaces away from my car. The man had a super intense gaze, and immediately creeped me out. He just had a sort of crazy energy about him. I don't really get vibes from people that often, but this was just so strange. He stood too close. His gaze was crazy direct and focused. His word choice was weird. Immediately, he set off all of my alarms. He asked if I was from the area, despite my Connecticut license plate, where I was headed to, if I knew anything fun to do because he had plans later and time to kill beforehand. He invited me to play mini-golf or watch a movie with him. I didn't answer any of his questions, declined his invitation to hang out, and told him I didn't know the area at all. I walked away towards the store. I was blown away that he asked me to go somewhere with him. It was really random and made me a bit uncomfortable. As I was walking away, he actually screamed out, "You're gorgeous," and the volume and tone made my hair stand on end. It was aggressive and inappropriate, and he startled a family walking out of the store because it was so loud. I didn't turn around to look at him, but just went inside. He came into the store shortly thereafter, and kept staring at me, so I went to use the bathroom and stayed in for at least 10 minutes, texting my friend all about this creepo. When I came out, he wasn't in the store anymore, so I took my time buying drinks and snacks. I went out to gas up my car. I was relieved because his car was gone, and started thinking about the rest of my drive, getting excited to see my friend. When I pull up onto the road to get back to the highway, though, I hear someone persistently honking his horn and see this creep show on the dirt road parallel to the on-ramp in his truck, honking, shouting, and waving at me to drive over to him. He was directly facing the gas station and had been waiting for me to pull up. I immediately freaked out and jumped onto the on-ramp back to I-78. He pulled onto the highway after me, and I called my friend, extremely scared. I started to drive faster, and probably a bit dangerously. Looking back, I'm lucky that I didn't get into an accident because I was driving so fast, but I didn't know what else to do. He didn't follow me for that long, and I think after a few exits he finally pulled off. My friend and I had a backup plan that if I ever saw his car again, she would direct me to a police station the next town over from her house, instead of my going directly there and leading some freak to us. I didn't see the car again, and went to my friend's. But the last hours of my drive, I was extremely tense and anxious. I remember checking my mirrors regularly for this black pickup truck. It all ended well. I got to my friend's house safely, and we had a pretty nice weekend. The encounter was definitely creepy, but over the years, I didn't put that much more thought into it. A few years ago, around 2014, I was talking with another friend who's big into serial killers, and mentioned my encounter jokingly, suggesting this might have been one. I told her my experience. She was fascinated and wanted to Google active serial killers in the Pennsylvania area at the time. The first hit was for Adam Leroy Lane, and he looked almost exactly like the man I met back in 2006. Obviously, it could just be my mind filling in the blanks, but the basic characteristics and the time and area all match up. In my memory, he was a bit slimmer than the pictures, and it was 2006, not 2007, when he was actually convicted of murdering women. Still, it's an odd coincidence, and one I've never forgotten. This happened a good few years ago. For some context, I was in my early 20s, single and living by myself. Most of my family lived about a 4-hour drive away from me. I was working for a small call center that provided, among other things, phone services for a 24-hour plumbing company, so they needed someone to be on the line at all times. My shift ran from 8 p.m. to whenever my boss showed up to pick up the line, which was usually about 6 a.m. I worked in a building that housed several businesses of the same sort, call center work mostly, though we were the only ones that had 24-hour services. Because of budget cuts, I was always the only operator on my floor. The only people in the building that night were myself and the security guy, who came to do his rounds about twice a night. Now, because the line had to be on 24/7, I was never allowed to disconnect while I was there. I ran to and from the bathroom, ate meals sitting in front of the computer, and every once in a while sneaked a cigarette at the window within the sight of the screen. Only the light above my computer was on. Everything else was turned off when everyone went away at around 10 p.m., so I was left in this half-darkness beneath a spotlight. I desperately needed that job to support myself, so despite the crap conditions, I kept repeating to myself that it wasn't that bad. Things were usually quiet after 10 p.m. I could use the extra hours on my paycheck and didn't need to get a second job. I did a lot of reading and even considered going back to school because, if nothing else, the night shift would afford me plenty of time to study. So one night around 2 a.m. or so, I got a call. I introduced myself as I always did. "Hello, you were calling so-and-so. My name is Jill. How may I help you?" The guy on the other side repeated my name and hung up immediately. Working phone services on the night shift, you get used to a lot of weird stuff, so I shrugged it off and went back to my book. He then called again and asked if he was speaking to Jill. I said yes, repeated the company name, and asked him how I could help.
He hangs up again immediately. The third time around, he asks if this is Jill on the phone, and I ask to whom I'm speaking. He hangs up again. The next time he calls, he's breathing hard on the phone and tells me he wants me to talk to him and he's not going to hurt me. I jot down his phone number and I start hanging up whenever his calls pop up, which was for the better part of an entire hour. This went on for months. When he realized I was hanging up every time I saw that number, he began calling from a restricted number, meaning I never knew if it was a legit call and ended up answering. All the time, this guy keeps saying he wants me to talk to him and that he's not going to hurt me. The one time I counted, I hung up on this guy over 200 times in one night. Every time he would call, I'd say the company name, and as soon as I heard him, I'd hung up. I complained to my boss, but she did nothing. Instead, she laughed the whole thing off, because this guy obviously didn't know where I was, and he was only a voice on the line and I was perfectly safe. Some time into this, I started talking to my coworkers, and here's where it started to get really creepy. He never called on my days off, when someone else would be covering my shift. Indeed, at one point I even changed shifts with a coworker to attend a wedding, and he didn't call at all that day. As time went by, I was getting pretty spooked by the whole situation, and the fact that my boss did zero to try and stop this. My coworkers were all sympathetic, and told me that if my boss did nothing, I should file a complaint directly myself. I'm not sure I could, because this wasn't happening on my personal number. None of them could really walk me home, since I was the only operator in night shift. Everyone else was gone by the time my boss arrived and I left the office. I got a little paranoid, because obviously this guy knew my schedule pretty well, and even if I changed shifts, he would only call if he knew I was on the line. It had to somehow be someone who could see me. I started doing commute with my cell phone in hand at all times, with the emergency number dialed in just in case. Sometimes I did the whole commute on the phone with friends or relatives to keep calm. Since it's illegal to carry pepper spray here, at one point I considered walking around with a box cutter in my purse. That's how afraid I was. One day before my shift started, I was at the entrance of the building smoking a cigarette before going up, and I see a security guy come by. Same fellow who usually did the night shift, this huge man. I didn't really know him, never spoke to him much, only said good evening or goodbye when I went by his desk, and whenever he came to my floor to do his rounds. I usually kept to myself and never really made small talk or anything, just greeted him out of politeness and he greeted me back. He asked for a light, so I gave him my lighter, and he told me he'd been fired and he was going home. He went on to tell me that he always got the impression that I was afraid of him, since I was never friendly or welcoming. He then told me he was never going to hurt me, and just walked away. I lost every drop of blood I had in me. I went inside to tell my boss the whole thing, and discovered the man had been fired for harassing a woman on other floors, going as far as trying to corner someone in one of the elevators. The complaints filed up, and he lost his job. Most of the time his shifts matched directly with mine, so he would see me come in at 8 p.m. and left before I did. I asked my boss for that phone number again, to come forward on this guy. Asked the security number if that was his number. She told me she'd throw it away. When I told her the whole story, she found it cute. Then she asked me if I was sure it was him, because a voice on the phone is different and maybe you got it wrong. Quality assurance told us time and again that our every call was recorded, so I demanded the recordings. That's when I found out that, again because of budget cuts and whatnot, the night shift was never recorded, so I had no evidence. Once the guy was fired, the calls stopped. I didn't work there for much longer after that. When I was about 16 years old, I decided to get myself a job for the summer. This would be the very first job I'd ever had, as my mom would usually be the one to provide me with money. I was pretty clueless on where to start, so my aunt did the heavy work and found me a job babysitting for one of her customers. She works at a salon, and the customer's name was Jeremiah. Jeremiah is a Nigerian man who always goes there to get a cut. She tells me he's extremely nice, and she presumes he's well off because he always tips well. I'm pretty excited, because babysitting for a couple of hours and making good money sounds like music to my 16-year-old self-ears. So about a week before I'm supposed to start babysitting Jeremiah's kids for the summer, I meet up with him. He introduces himself to me and wants me to meet the kids on a short trial basis, for about an hour a day from Monday to Friday. He agrees to pay me $30 for the hour, as he was paying me $10 for each child and there were 3 of them. I meet with the kids and they all seem pretty easygoing. There was a 2-year-old, Felicia, a 5-year-old, Jeremiah, he was a junior, and a 7-year-old, Heaven. All in all, it seemed like it was going to be a good summer. But it wasn't. The first few days of the trial went great. I would come see the kids and take them to a park, or play a game with them until I had to go home. However, on the Friday of that week, it started to get weird. I came to the house as I usually did, and greeted Jeremiah and took the kids to the park, as I had been doing for almost about 4 days now routinely. However, this day was not like the rest. Jeremiah calls me 15 minutes into the day, screaming at me to bring back his children. I was terrified that something had happened, so panicking, I pack up the kids and we go back to the house. Once we're all in the home, he tells the kids to go to their rooms, and this is where the horror begins. He tells me that I'm no longer allowed to take the kids to the park. Confused, I ask why. He explains to me that his ex-wife often goes to the park and watches the kids and that he's afraid for their safety. Well, let me tell you, that's news to me, as when I first met him, he specifically told me that he and his wife had gotten a divorce. Why? Because she had been bringing men back to the home, and he had suspected one of them had been touching Heaven. Those were his exact words. He also told me that his ex had lost her custodial rights and was in prison, so you could see where I was confused. Nonetheless, whatever doubt and confusion I had in my mind, I push it down and swear to him that if I ever did see her around the house, I would call the police, as he had previously told me he had a restraining order out on her. He tells me not to ever call the police if I see her, but to only call him. Again, I push the doubts in my mind to the side and reluctantly agree. The first month of the summer goes well. I spend about 4 hours a day with the kids, and during those 4 hours, those kids are preoccupied with their gaming systems, or riding their dirt bike, or doing whatever they want in their massive house. However, once July rolls around, things get a bit strange. Jeremiah starts coming home from work early on Wednesdays. That's not the strange part. The strange part is that he would come home early from work and expect me to remain at the home until my day was done. And he also starts to recruit me to do things with the kids and him, like going clothing shopping, going to the doctor's, going to the supermarket, or even the movies. I was starting to feel more like a nanny than a babysitter. When I would express the idea of going home as I wasn't needed, he would always get upset and guilt me into staying. The kids need you. This is your responsibility. I was annoyed, but I let it go, as I'm only spending 4 hours a day there and getting paid very well. My sister Michelle, on the other hand, would openly tell me how weird she finds Jeremiah, and how she thought he was trying to groom me into being the kid's surrogate parent and his new wife. I laugh off the idea, as nothing even mildly inappropriate has ever happened. That is, until one day. I came to the home as per usual, and Jeremiah leaves to work. About an hour into me being there, I hear a knock on the door. Before I could ask who it is, Heaven sprints to the door and swings it open. To my surprise, it's a woman. I ask her who she is, and she tells me she's the kid's mother. I'm shocked and frightened, as that woman isn't supposed to have any contact with these kids. I tell her Jeremiah is at work and that I'm watching the kids in his absence. She gives me a very cynical look and tells me that I can go home as she's there now. I tell her Jeremiah told me not to let her in, and if she visits, that she needs to leave. I half expect her to curse me out, but to my surprise, she says, "Fine," kisses the kids goodbye and leaves. I quickly, in a panic, phone Jeremiah and tell him of the recent occurrence. He doesn't seem upset at all. He doesn't even seem surprised. Instead, he calmly thanks me for alerting him, and as he was ending the call, tells me that I'm a good girl. Again, I'm a bit sketched out, but proceed to continue to watch the kids. While I was there, I started to become curious on the nature of the relationship between the mother and the kids, since they didn't seem to really miss her at all while she was away. Therefore, I do the only logical thing I can do, and proceed to pry answers out of Heaven and Jeremiah Jr. To my utter disbelief, what I find out is shocking. It turns out the reason why the kids barely seem to miss their mother is due to her never being gone in the first place. They tell me their mother comes home every day, right when Wheel of Fortune is coming on. I ask them if she stays or goes to her own home, and they tell me she sometimes spends the night in their dad's room, but when he's mad at her, she leaves. So I ask the next logical question. I ask Heaven why her dad is often angry at her mom, and she tells me it's because Mom isn't a good listener. Right then and there, I get a chill, because up until that point, it seems like I'm putting together a puzzle, but none of the pieces are matching. I start rewinding to certain things Jeremiah would say to me, and certain things he would do that I didn't think much of. For instance, every time I was playing with Felicia when he was around, he would always tell me I'm a good mom. Not that I will be a good mother, no, that I am one. He asked me if I'm dating anyone, which I innocently answered that I'm not. He even asked me if I'm sexually active, which I rightfully declined to answer, although I'm not either. He becomes really touchy with me, always wanting to touch my hair or hug me goodbye. He comments on my appearance a lot, telling me how attractive and in shape I look. He makes me stay later on certain days, even after he's home. I get the feeling those were the days he kicked his ex out. And last but not least, Jeremiah starts to advise me to come in through the garage and not the front door when I come in the morning. Each time I do, I'm greeted by a shirtless Jeremiah who attempts to go in for a lingering hug. I honestly think he wanted something to occur in that garage. He would attempt to keep me there conversing with him in the dark. It was a combination of those things, as well as what the kids tell me, that makes me question the legitimacy of everything he's ever told me. I begin to think that maybe Jeremiah didn't want a babysitter, but a new wife to be the mother of his kids. As time progresses, I found out even worse news. Jeremiah's ex-wife isn't even his ex. They're still married. He apparently abuses her often, and is paranoid that she's having an affair with someone, so he sent her away to Nigeria for a month. I learn all this from the woman in the salon my aunt works at. Not only that, but also that Jeremiah constantly brings women home while the wife is away. She finds out about this because she sometimes pretends to go to work and stays behind to watch for visitors. She's asked him for a divorce, which is why he sent her away. I also learned that he would regularly threaten to kill her if she ever leaves him. By the time all this truth has come out, I'm done. I have about a month and some change left, but I tell Jeremiah I can no longer watch the kids, because I have to attend some basketball camp, which is a lie. He became visibly upset, and literally tells me I have to continue to come back. I tell him I would not be doing so, and that's when he starts to become irate. He calls me a slut, and tells me the only reason I want to leave the kids and him is because I was seeing other men. Mind you, I was 16 at the time, with no obligation to watch over his kids or him. I leave that day crying and don't come back the next day. My mom asks me why I'm no longer working there, and I tell her it was because the job was too stressful. About a week later, I'm up in my room and hear the doorbell ring. I didn't think much of it until I hear Jeremiah's voice. I creep down the living room to see him casually sprawled over one of our couches, as if he lives there. I hear his booming voice directed at my mother, and what I presume to be his authoritative voice. He states, "We need to talk about my girl. She hasn't been to my house in a bit, and the kids are starting to get worried. I don't like that. Where is she?" My mother, picking up on the strangeness of the situation, lies and tells him I've left with a friend, to which he has the audacity to ask whether it's a male or female friend. That's the straw that breaks the camel's back. My mom tells Jeremiah that his questions are invasive and predatory. She then asks him to leave, which, to my surprise, he does. From there on, I don't see or hear of Jeremiah for about a year. He still texts me, but I quickly learn to block his number. After a year, I learned some more information. His wife has gotten full custody of the kids, and they're living in another city about an hour from where we do. I thought that was miraculous, because Jeremiah makes it abundantly clear that those kids and his wife are his. A few months after learning that information, I'm jogging in my neighborhood when I wander by his house. I try to sprint past it, but I'm dead from my run. So instead, I opt to cross the street and stay a good distance from his house, in case he's somewhere nearby. I guess God was mad at me that day, because out of nowhere, Jeremiah pulls into the road and stops his car near me. He rolls down his window and asks how I'd been. I'm scared shitless, but he's pretty civil despite how we left things prior to this. He babbles on about himself and makes some off comments about my body, but what catches my attention is what he says towards the end of our conversation. He tells me his wife tricked him into losing custody of the kids. And this is how it went down. She calls him while he's at work one day and tells him Jeremiah Jr. has been acting up. Being the abusive piece of shit he is, he runs home to show Jeremiah some discipline and respect. Well, his wife records the whole thing. The police are called and a report is filed. I guess that's how she's awarded temporary custody of the kids. However, he assures me that he'll be getting his kids back because they're his, and his wife will soon pay for her transgressions. The whole conversation made me feel uneasy, and I was glad when it ended. I ran home and briefly told my sisters about it, then never think about it again. Until I hear the news, a few weeks before my birthday, from my aunt of all people, that Jeremiah has gotten his kids back. His wife mysteriously falls ill and goes back to Nigeria before dying. I know it sounds crazy, but that's exactly what my aunt told me. Again, I'm frightened after hearing that news and disclosed to my sisters what he told me a few months prior to her death. About a year after, I'm jogging again and pass his house. This time he comes out of his house to wave me down. He asks if I want to say hi to the kids. I tell him no, as they probably won't even remember me. He then asks me something shocking. He asks if I want to say hi to his wife, and calls her to come out. I'm then approached by a very young woman, probably only a few years older than me, with a baby on her arm. She smiles and politely introduces herself. I'm shook. I exchange pleasantries and finish up my jog hurriedly. Once I get home, I tell my sisters what I've just seen. I don't know if Jeremiah did anything to his wife, but I have an eerie feeling in my gut that he's not at all that innocent. This happened when I was around 10. I live in a relatively small country, and it only took a couple hours' drive to get from my house to my aunt's in another county. This story starts off with me and my mom driving home from my aunt's. We're driving on a country road when this battered-looking minivan started driving in front of us at a roundabout. We were the only two cars on the road. There were gardening tools and a tarp in the back window. It was clear that the driver was either drunk, high, or a fucking idiot. They were repeatedly swerving in and out of their lane like they were a video game protagonist. It was a hot day, so both of our cars had the windows down. We could hear what sounded like a sermon blasting from their radio. We drove behind them for roughly 7 minutes with my mom muttering about the state of the country. The minivan abruptly stopped in the middle of the road, which roughly pissed off my mom. The driver then did an illegal U-turn, during which 2 things happened. I saw the driver's face. He was a skinny, middle-aged man with dirty yellow hair and a beard, and we both got a good look at each other's license plates. The driver turned into the opposite lane and drove past us, heading back into town, still driving erratically and almost hitting us. After he was gone, my mom pulled over and called the police to report him, giving them his license plate and a description of his appearance. The cop thanked us and promised to get right on it. When we were nearly home, my mom got a call from the guards where they told her they had arrested the man, who had warrants for drug dealing and domestic abuse. My mom was thanked, and we all joked about her being a hero over pizza that night. Cut to a few weeks later when school was starting up again. I had gone with my dad to the hardware store. While my dad was at the checkout, I was looking out at the parking lot when I saw the battered minivan driving out of the lot. I didn't see the driver, so I convinced myself that it was only a coincidence, although my dad noticed I seemed uneasy for the rest of the night. A few days later, my mom came home early from work, looking like she had just run a marathon. She gave me and my brothers tight hugs, and we were sent to bed far earlier than usual that night. I didn't learn about this next part until last year. The reason my mom was acting so weird is because her secretary had reported seeing a strange man inspecting the license plates of my mom's car. My mom asked what the man had looked like, and froze when she was given the description of the man we had reported. That weekend, my mom didn't want any of us kids leaving the house, but I was a stubborn little shit and all but demanded to be allowed out for a quick walk around the neighborhood. While I was out, and roughly 15 minutes away from my house, a vehicle drove past me. It was the minivan, and the same man was in the driver's seat giving me a friendly nod. As soon as he was out of sight, I ran back home and told my parents, who immediately bundled us all into my dad's car and drove to stay the night at Grandma's. I was put in the guest room but had zero chance of falling asleep, so I was wide awake for all the drama that happened that night. My parents called the cops and informed them about the man stalking us. A couple of hours later, a squad car pulled up outside and the officers told my parents everything. When they arrived to our house, they had discovered the front door had been forced open. Some of our nicest possessions had been smashed and were left in shards on the floor. But that's not the worst part. The worst part was where the police found the man. In the pantry, holding what a female officer described as the biggest damn knife I've ever seen. We spent the next few days at Grandma's, while my parents took care of all the legal business. The man was sentenced to life in a psychiatric hospital, and none of us have seen him since. I dread to think what might have happened had I not gone for a walk that day.
What is up, guys? Blue Spooky here as always. Thank you guys so much for watching, especially if you made it this far to the end of the video. If you guys enjoyed the content of this video, please be sure to like, share, comment, and subscribe if you feel so inclined. If you do decide you like my content enough to subscribe, please be sure to hit the bell button right next to the subscribe button and turn notifications to all so you can be notified of every video I post in the future. If you don't feel like doing that though, I post a video nearly every day, so you can just come back every now and then and check up on what you missed. If you guys have any criticisms on what I can do better or any feedback on the stories in the video, please be sure to leave them in the comments below, as I always enjoy reading all the comments and I try to give them hearts and respond when I can. If you guys would like to reach me for any reason, or you would like to send in a story to be read, you can go ahead and take a look in the description below the video. You'll find a link to all of my social media, including my Facebook, Gmail, and Twitter accounts. Go ahead and send me a message on any of those, and I'll try to get back to you as soon as possible. If you do decide to send in a story, please be sure to include in the tagline what the name of the story is if it has one, what type of story it is if it has a theme, and how you would like to be credited in the description of the video the story appears in. Last but not least, I also run 2 other channels, Mr. Blue Skies and Darkest Hour, where I do true crime videos and dark documentaries respectively. If that kind of content sounds interesting to you, why not go ahead and check it out and see if it is for you. Aside from that though guys, I think that's pretty much it for now, so thank you guys so much for watching, and I hope you guys have a great day.